Chapter 732. On that day, when eunuch Lin had received the decree to enter the Orthodox Academy, Qin Changsheng had said something similar. Shang Xingzhou had been in the Li Palace at the time, conversing with the Pope. His reaction to this was very similar. Truly childish. Qin Changsheng's face still had a hint of childishness, but anyone could see the firmness within. He knew that his view was correct. The Tianhai Divine Empress was dead. The Pope had returned to the Sea of Stars. The demon lord had fallen into the abyss, and Wang Jizhi had secluded himself from the world. There were very few people in the world that could contend against Shang Xingzhou. His Tao heart was brightly lit, his Tao unhindered, and his cultivation unfathomable. He ruled over the great Zhou dynasty and possessed the friendship of White Emperor City. He seemed invulnerable, almost perfect, but he still had a flaw. This flaw was none other than his youngest disciple, Qin Changsheng, whom he had always disliked. Beside Xining Village's old temple was a small stream. Flowers drifted along the stream. The temple hid 3,000 Taoist scriptures, but master and disciple only cultivated one, following one's heart. Following one's heart was an extremely powerful divine ability of the Taoist faith. Only by standing under the starry sky, with a clear conscience and no regrets, could one be fearless, their Tao heart brightly lit, their Tao unhindered. In his 10-some years in Xining Village's old temple, Shang Xingzhou had never taught Yu Ren or Qin Changsheng any Taoist techniques, only had them recite the Taoist scriptures. But once they began to interact with specific cultivation methods, they would advance at an astonishing speed. Qin Changsheng's breakthrough into star condensation in 3 years and Yu Ren's ability to freely walk among the heavenly tone monoliths were both because of this. Correspondingly, this Taoist technique had an extremely high demand on the mind. It was like a snow lotus at the summit of a mountain that could not be contaminated by the slightest dirt. How could one not be confused by external objects? How could one possess an unshakable will and self-confidence? One word to remember: the heart. You only needed to be able to convince yourself. If you could convince yourself that what you were doing was right, that it was in accordance with your heart, then it would naturally follow your heart. This sounded very simple, but it was actually not. If one looked into the depths of the soul, if one were in a hidden room cut off from the world, how many people could truly say no regrets? Who can firmly believe that everything he does is right? Several hundred years ago, Shang Xingzhou was still one of the legitimate successors of the orthodoxy. He originally could have followed the predetermined path until he became the Pope, but he chose a different path. He used the name of Taoist Ji to live in this world. And when Taoist Wu painted one portrait after another in the Lingyan Pavilion, he was responsible for returning the people in those portraits to the Sea of Stars. The people in those portraits were all heroes of the human race, all meritorious subjects of the great Zhou, but they had died just like that in a conspiracy. Some of them, like Qin Zhong and Divine General Yu Gong, were willing to die. But what about the other dukes? The heroic spirits in the Lingyan Pavilion had been watching Shang Xingzhou this entire time. Perhaps the resentful souls that had died even earlier in the 100 Herb Garden were also watching Shang Xingzhou. The innocent people who died in the chaos today would surely be looking at him. But these things still could not affect Shang Xingzhou's Tao heart, because he had many reasons to convince himself. He looked down on those so-called ambitious and ruthless people and loathed schemers like Black Robe who did not dare to see the light of day the most. He viewed himself as Emperor Taizong's successor, and with the world in his heart, he could naturally disregard the trifles. For the continued existence of the great Zhou dynasty for 10,000 years, for the bright future of the human race, this was an inevitable price. But there was one thing that Shang Xingzhou still had not found a suitable way to convince himself: Qin Changsheng. Yes, the wooden basin floating in the stream, the infant in the basin, the drooping whiskers of the golden dragon. All of it was a conspiracy. But the Qin Changsheng he first saw was not the Duke of Wei, not Wang Jizhi, not Tianhai, not a general of great authority, not a tycoon whose wealth was unparalleled in the world, not a noble consort with long sleeves and dancing, not a repulsive eunuch, not an impassioned scholar whose eloquence would harm the country, not an experienced and prudent minister who cherished his reputation. It was just an infant that could not even open its eyes, an infant that was ignorant and senseless, an infant that had no good, no evil, and no thoughts. He could not find any reason to convince himself that this was the right thing to do. In these 14 years, every time he saw Chun Changsheng, a question would arise in his mind, a shadow cast over his Tao heart. Life in Xining Village's old temple was very simple, and not seeing each other was countless times more difficult than meeting. Chun Changsheng had gone from an infant to a youth like the spring breeze. The shadow over Shang Xingzhou's Tao heart was already as thick as the night. I know that teacher does not feel any guilt towards me. This matter has nothing to do with good or evil. It is just that you are unable to convince yourself, and convincing yourself will always be the most important thing. Chun Changsheng looked at Shang Xingzhou and said, "So, my existence is a very frightening thing to you." Before the Buddhist sect was destroyed, there was a saying about the heart barrier. He was currently Shang Xingzhou's heart barrier. Shang Xingzhou wanted to do everything he could to get rid of this heart barrier. Only by doing so could he truly maintain the brightness of his Tao heart. He wished for Chun Changsheng to die, but he could not personally do it, as that would have no effect. It would only make the heart barrier grow deeper and deeper, and there would be no chance to get rid of it. Several days ago, even if Yuren had not used such a decisive method to keep him in the Snow Palace, he would not have gone to the alley of the Northern Military Department, but to the Li Palace. Back on the divine path of the Mausoleum of Books, when he walked down the divine path, he did not even glance at Chun Changsheng, nor did he stop Chun Changsheng from taking away the Tianhai Divine Empress's remains. He had already thought through his future plans. He wanted to use these matters as an excuse to very naturally have Chun Changsheng die at the hands of others. There were quite a few times when he was already very close to success. For instance, Eunuch Lin wanted to sweep away the threats and obstacles to the young emperor's rule. He wanted to use the matter of the Tianhai Divine Empress's remains to cause trouble and privately attempt to kill Chun Changsheng, but he did not succeed. Or perhaps he wanted to use Xue Xingchuan's encounter to use Zhou Tong as a bait to have Chun Changsheng strike first, and then kill him. Alas, none of them succeeded, Chun Changsheng said. I did not expect that you had already seen through all this, but it doesn't matter. Shang Xingzhou's expression was somewhat regretful. If not for Wang Pe, you would have already died to Tai Shu that day. When Eunuch Lin suddenly attacked in the Orthodox Academy, Chun Changsheng had already understood everything, but now that he saw his master's regret, he still felt rather sad. Shang Xingzhou looked at him and continued, I swore to your martial uncle that I would not act against you, and this is the truth. Whether it's Lin or Zhou, neither of them were deliberately arranged by me. Everything happened naturally. If you had insisted on staying in the capital, these sorts of things would have happened more and more, and they would not have been affected by my intentions. It was difficult to determine whether these words were true or false, but there was no need to determine whether they were true or false. A person's intentions would always fluctuate between what was true and what was false. Even if one could see through the color and fragrance of flowers, one would still find it impossible to see through these things. On the wall across from the lake, some blue-clothed Taoists appeared. These blue-clothed Taoists possessed unfathomable cultivations, and as their sleeves fluttered in the wind, they faintly exuded killing intent. Successful completion of the Genesis update. Right now, I'm just worried about whether or not it will synchronize to the starting point. If this is the case, there will be duplicate chapters. Tomorrow, during the day, I will ask the technical staff of the website to help me deal with this. If there really is a duplicate subscription, I will think of a way to make it up to everyone. Chapter 733. Is it really going to be like this? Chun Changsheng's gaze fell across the lake. The existence of these blue-clothed Taoists was no longer a secret. Many people knew that they came from the eastern capital, Luoyang, from a small and nameless Taoist monastery. I said before, I've made no arrangements, Shang Xingzhou said. The height of the sun determined the angle at which many plants grew. An important figure like Shang Xingzhou did not need to do anything or make any arrangements for many people to naturally be willing to kill Qin Changsheng for him, because he had already expressed his stance through many matters. Qin Changsheng drew back his gaze and looked at Shang Xingzhou. Even if this is a war, in accordance with the Pope's final decree, he had come to the Orthodox Academy to carry out this important negotiation with Shang Xingzhou, so he had naturally made arrangements. The Li Palace was already on standby, the Orthodoxy cavalry ready to charge at any time. When the blue-clothed Taoists arrived by the lake, Mao Qiuyu and the others were probably already there. Most importantly, he was now the Pope. If Shang Xingzhou still insisted on killing him, he would assuredly incite a war that would destroy the entire capital. Many people in the Li Palace will support me, Shang Xingzhou calmly said. As the sole saint of the great Zhou dynasty, the teacher of the emperor and the Pope, Shang Xingzhou's prestige had already reached an absurd level, and he was a legitimate successor of the orthodoxy. From every angle, he had the right to enter the Li Palace, let alone the ordinary priests of the Li Palace. Even the cardinals, and even some of the 5 prefects, would be willing to accept his descent. It was only because the Pope's final decree and subsequent measures were extremely unyielding and the great announcement had been announced to the world that the orthodoxy could maintain its unity in unity. If Shang Xingzhou really took the risk, even if he could not personally act, he still had enough strength to forcefully kill Qin Changsheng in the Orthodox Academy. As long as he moved fast enough and made a small enough disturbance. Just what would happen next? The snowstorm enveloped the capital, also enveloped the Orthodox Academy. Together with the snowstorm was a dense mass of soldiers whose numbers were difficult to discern. A girl walked out from the other end of the snowstorm. The little girl was dressed in black. Her head was slightly lowered, and her slightly wide collar turned into a black curtain hat that covered her face. Miraculously, she walked along the street all the way to the entrance of Hundred Blossom Lane, but none of the cavalrymen noticed her. Only when she got close did the experts of the imperial court and the priests of the Li Palace at the mouth of the alley see the footprints in the snow and discover her existence. "Halt!" someone shouted. It was unknown whether it was a general of the court or a cardinal. It was very likely that something big would happen tonight. The capital sank into an incomparably tense atmosphere. At this moment, a young girl suddenly walked out of the wind and snow. Anyone would find it strange. Hearing this voice, the black-clothed girl's body trembled. She lowered her head and continued to walk deeper into the alley. Her footsteps became even more hurried, as if she was afraid. Of course, such a reaction could also be interpreted as arrogance. Courting death. A sinister voice rang out from the shadows in the alley. The buildings in Hundred Flowers Lane had been completely flattened by the cavalry of the imperial court in the previous few days. Only that tea house, which had some commemorative value, was left standing. Just as the black-clothed girl walked past that ruined building, an even more sinister and venomous sword glow pierced out of the shadows along with that sinister voice. This sword glow was abnormally bright. Mixed in with the wind and snow, it was unremarkable, and the sword energy was terrifying to the extreme. Even more frightening was that as this sword glow brightened, the shadows of the mouth of the alley began to faintly emit stardust. The first to strike was a star condensation assassin, probably from the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets. Experts that had just been subdued by the imperial court always wanted to prove their worth as quickly as possible. A few days ago, they had encircled Qin Changsheng in the alley of the Northern Military Department, but it had ultimately turned into a chaotic and inconclusive battle. Tonight, they did not want to miss another chance. No one could have predicted what would happen next. Whether it was the assassins in the alley, the experts of the military, the guardians of the princely estates, or the Li Palace priests and experts of the various academies at the end of the alley. When the sinister sword glow arrived, the girl still had her head lowered, her face hidden in her curtain hat. She did not react at all. Yet just like that, the sword glow shattered, transforming into countless fragments that dissipated into the night sky, truly mixing in with the wind and snow. The shattering here was truly shattering. The assassin's sword had directly shattered, causing those sword glows to shatter with it. There were not many people in the world that could deal with a star condensation assassin, and to be able to shatter the sword of a star condensation assassin, many people had never seen such a person. This was not the true conclusion, because after the sword glow shattered, another object shattered. The assassin had shattered. It was only a light hum. The snow in 100 Flowers Lane suddenly turned pink, as if someone had poured several large buckets of paint into it. Soon after, several dozen chunks of flesh fell to the ground like a torrential rain. Only upon careful inspection could one clearly see that they were human limbs and organs. Blood sprayed and severed limbs fell. All of this happened in an extremely brief instant. Only then did the crowd clearly see what was happening. The black-clothed girl still had her head lowered, her face hidden in the shadow of the curtain hat, but she had extended a hand forward. This hand was very small, very white, like a snow lotus, but at this moment it was dripping with blood. It was exceptionally clear and ghastly to the eye. The place where her small hand had appeared was a snowstorm. It had previously been the position of the star condensation assassin. The dark alley was deathly still. After a moment, several howls of panic and anger rose up. An assassin from the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets and 2 experts from the army transformed into 3 streams of snow and wind to attack. There were 3 soft popping sounds like 3 ripe grapes, or like 3 cracks on the surface of ice. The 3 streams of snow and wind suddenly shattered. The 3 experts of the imperial court once more became 3 showers of blood and flesh. No one could clearly see what the black-clothed girl had done, because in reality, she had not done anything at all. She had only extended her hand into the snow and wind. The snow and wind would obey her will and obliterate all existences within it. Then, she finally raised her head. The black curtain hat fell, her black hair falling down like a waterfall, revealing the face of a young girl. Her face was incomparably white, as if it had never seen the sun in its entire life. Her face was elegant and beautiful, but possessed a biting, cold chi. What was most striking was her eyes. They were vertical pupils. They seemed abnormally strange. At this moment, the emotions in her eyes were extremely complex. There was some reminiscence, some unease, some fear, and also some madness. This gaze, coupled with the blood on her snow-white face, made her seem incomparably terrifying. Suddenly, she stuck out her tongue and licked a strand of blood from the corner of her lips. At this sight, the experts hidden in the darkness and snow felt a fear that came from the deepest depths of their souls. Yesterday's upload truly did make a mistake, causing a few friends to subscribe to the previous chapter. I hereby solemnly apologize. This has nothing to do with the website. My hands were itching. In a few days, I will think of a way to make it up to you. In addition, today, I have an important matter that requires everyone's help. Today, the little black dragon has finally come out of the well and appeared on the screen. In the second half of this chapter, she will play a very important role, but even now, I have been unable to decide just which name to call her. Gigi, Zhu Sha, Hong Zhuang, or Her Highness the Princess. In a little while, I will post a poll on the official WeChat account, Mounty1118. I will trouble everyone to choose. I love you all. Okay, I have posted this chapter many times. Chapter 734. These experts had either come from the military, the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets, or the Department for Purging Officials. They had experienced countless life-and-death battles and seen countless bitter scenes. Logically speaking, no matter how terrifying a scene was, it should not have been enough to make their hearts tremble, but the black-clothed girl had only licked the blood from the corner of her lips to make them feel incomparable fear. Some of the weak-willed people even began to tremble. This was because this fear had already surpassed the limits of experience and reason. It came from the depths of their souls, a mark that seemed to have been branded into the starry sky countless years before they were born. The black-clothed girl stood in the snow, her feet bare, a chain hanging from her ankles. She looked just like a prisoner, and it was very easy to feel pity for her. But at this moment, No one in the alley was paying attention to these details. They had already been frozen into blocks of ice by the power she had displayed and the look in her eyes. In those glass-like eyes, whether it was madness or unease, reminiscence or fear, all became apathetic in the face of the rain of blood and flesh. It was even an apathy to death. This was too frightening. Just who was she? Many people had already noticed that the black-clothed girl had a pair of bewitching vertical pupils. Could she be a great demon hidden from the world? Then what did she have to do with White Emperor City? Some people subconsciously turned to a certain snowstorm in the middle of Hundred Flowers Lane. The supreme expert of the demi-human's middle generation, Shouda, was currently there. When they saw Shouda, they were shocked once more. Shouda was currently in a very strange state. It was like he was suffering from a serious illness. His face was pale, and even in the cold of winter, he was constantly sweating. Countless wisps of hot steam rose from his hair and robe into the night sky, but they still could not conceal the fear and alarm in his eyes. As a great general of the demi-human race and an expert of the proclamation of liberation, Shouda was naturally confident. Even when facing Wang Pa, who he had never been able to defeat and who made others despair, he would not be so afraid. Only when he encountered the middle-aged scholar demon Lord by the stream in Mount Han did he have a similar reaction. The crowd was stunned by this sight, once more calling out that question in their minds. Just who was she? Everyone looked in fear and unease at the black-clothed girl at the mouth of the alley. At this moment, another accident occurred. The black-clothed girl suddenly bent down and began to vomit. She constantly vomited as if only by vomiting out everything in her body would she feel better. After some time, she seemed to feel better and straighten her body. But when she saw the mess on the snow-covered ground, her snow-white face flushed with embarrassment and anger. She began to stomp her feet and complain incessantly. Her black hair danced wildly, and she looked like a little girl who had been agitated or wronged. She was very angry. The snow-white bare feet kept stepping on the snowy ground, and the chains kept rattling. Boom, 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 boom. There seemed to be thunder exploding at the entrance of the alley. The snowy ground trembled, and the heaven and earth became restless. The cold air was squeezed with all its might, and then it escaped into the distance. An unimaginably powerful aura appeared, tearing everything in its path as it followed her movements. Regardless of whether it was the softest snow or the hardest stone, regardless of whether it was the formation that had just been set up the night before or the old wall that had been built for 300 years in the south of Hundred Flowers Lane, under this terrifying aura, they all shattered into the tiniest pieces. The experts of the imperial court hidden in the darkness and snow did not dare to linger. They were all forced out, flying into the distance like arrows. For a moment, the outside of the Orthodox Academy was filled with sounds of air being torn apart and cries of fear. After some time, the black-clothed girl stopped stamping her feet. She lowered her head and stood where she was, her slightly swollen chest rising and falling. The snow at the entrance of the alley had completely vanished, and the filth that she had vomited on the snow had also disappeared. Only the ground remained. Some deep cracks had appeared on the ground, steam rising from them. Through this venting, she had somewhat calmed down, no longer as angry as before. However, as she glanced at the blood on her hands and body, anger once more appeared in her bewitching vertical pupils. This time, without waiting for her to do anything, the experts of the imperial court once more flew through the air, wanting nothing more than to fly out of the capital. Even the experts of the orthodoxy in the distance subconsciously retreated several dozen zhang. Fortunately, she did not once more fall into madness. She maintained her calm. She glanced at the filthy blood on her body. The filthy blood was frozen into frost by the extreme cold and then rustled to the ground. This scene seemed simple, but in the eyes of those star condensation cultivators in the darkness, it was like a miracle. Just how much and how pure Star Radiant's true essence was needed to lower the temperature to this level in such a short time. Even if experts of the divine domain like the storms of the 8 directions could do this, who would waste so much Star Radiant's true essence just to make themselves a little cleaner? The crowd was once more stunned at this sight, once more calling out that question in their minds. Just who was she? The black-clothed girl did not know what they were thinking, nor did she care. She did not care in the slightest. She walked into the alley, the chains around her ankles dragging on the ground, clanging and clanging, then transforming into a muffled boom. That tea house that had accompanied the Orthodox Academy in its rise and fall, that had watched many of the all-school martial exhibitions, had collapsed. The collapsed tea house had not stirred up a single speck of dust, as countless snowstorms howled down from the sky. In the shortest amount of time, a thick layer had formed, completely covering the rubble and dust. She faced the snowstorm avoiding it. As the purest, noblest, and probably the only black frost dragon left in the world, the snowstorm had always been her subjects. After she crawled out of that abandoned well, she did not know where to go, so she had come to the Orthodox Academy. Of course, this was also because before the green leaf had pulled the chains out of the stone wall, she had made a promise to herself. Braving the snowstorm from New North Bridge, she had never felt cold. On the contrary, she felt her cheeks burn a little, because freedom truly felt good. Perhaps it was because she was about to see him as a free person. But when she was about to reach 100 Flowers Lane, she felt uneasy and fearful because she sensed that many people were hiding in the darkness. These people could be considered experts of the human race. Although they were not enough to threaten her, they were enough to pose some trouble. But her uneasiness and fear had nothing to do with this. She was just afraid of crowds. Many, many years ago, when she had come from the warm seas of the South to this strange continent in search of her father, she had been surrounded by many people. She did not like crowds of people that crowded around her like ants. It made her feel somewhat disgusted, somewhat uneasy. She felt that the explanation given by Chen Changsheng was very correct. This was called trypophobia. What she disliked even more was that whether she was flying in the sky or walking on the ground, there would always be so many people pointing at her, shouting something, crying something. She did not understand. She had done nothing. So why would these humans cry? Because they were weak and afraid? Then should she feel sorry for being strong? She thought so. The voting on the official WeChat account is far more intense than I imagined. I originally thought that Gigi would be far ahead, but I didn't think that the other two topics would also have so many supporters. It's nearing 10,000 votes, but the difference is still around 100 votes. It's also because of this that today's chapter can only continuously use she. Even the chapter's name is she. Haha. Let's end it at midnight today. The name of the little black dragon will be decided by everyone. Chapter 735. On the 7th night after landing, she was ambushed by a treacherous silver dragon from behind the clouds and sustained significant injuries. In the following half a month, she was unable to transform into a dragon and could only walk on the ground. Since she had to interact with the humans, she could only endure. If those humans were only crying, cursing, pointing, she might have been able to endure, but when that scholar surnamed Zhou from the countryside rushed over with a red face and said that he wanted to rid her of the 4 pests, she could no longer endure. As a noble black frost dragon, she loved cleanliness, so how could she allow that man reeking of alcohol to approach her? That day, she extended her hand just like tonight. Thus, that scholar surnamed Zhou died, transformed into a flower of blood. That flower of blood from several hundred years ago was even more beautiful than tonight's bloom. The scholar surnamed Zhou was even more thoroughly shattered, turning into powder that was blown away by the wind. Perhaps it was because she did not have these chains on her feet at the time. She thought to herself. In short, the scholar surnamed Zhou died. Later on, according to that wicked scholar surnamed Wang, he even appeared in the local county annals and became a hero praised by all the people. She expressed that she did not understand this, nor did she care. The people of that county later organized 10-some volunteer armies to kill her, but she ended up killing many of them. The people of that county were all very disorderly, so presumably the annals were also written randomly. She thought to herself, but too many people really was very vexing. She had an extremely poor memory of this. When she sensed the countless people surrounding the Orthodox Academy tonight, Her first reaction was unease and then fear. She used a curtain hat to conceal her beautiful face and quicken her pace, wanting to enter the Orthodox Academy as quickly as possible, but she was still discovered by someone at the entrance of 100 Flowers Lane. The assassin from the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets had sneaked out of the snowstorm and wanted to kill her. This assassin did not have much of a scent compared to that scholar surnamed Joe from several hundred years ago. But as a noble black frost dragon, when offended, she naturally had to make a response befitting of her status. This response was even faster than her ability to think. It was to have the assassin die. The assassin from the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets exploded in a blood and flesh that fell to the snowy ground. She felt a lot more comfortable, and the fear she felt towards the crowd in the depths of her heart faded a lot. Accompanied by this, the ruthlessness in her heart gradually increased. Following that, she killed another 2 human powerhouses. As the blood splashed and death approached, all of her fear and uneasiness disappeared. Her violent emotions triggered her bloodthirsty instincts. She instinctively licked the blood at the corner of her lips. She thought it would be sweet and delicious, but who knew it would be so filthy and stinky? Was it because the yuan qi on the continent was thin that humans became much more unpalatable? Or could it be the food that Chen Changsheng sent over in the past few years was too rich, which made him picky? As she thought of this, she couldn't help but feel nauseous and vomit. This situation made her very angry, making her feel a lot of resentment towards the weak humans and Chen Changsheng, who might be harboring evil intentions. She began to lose her temper. Like a wrong child, she kept stamping her feet, scaring away the wind and snow, cracking the ground, and scaring the whole world. The wind and snow rose once more as she walked towards the Orthodox Academy. Her body was not very large. On the contrary, it was rather petite, but as she approached, the space in 100 Flowers Lane began to faintly deform as if it was about to burst. Blood seeped out of the darkness, perhaps from assassins who had not been able to escape in time or soldiers who had been knocked unconscious. The experts of the imperial court that had fled far away sensed that terrifying qi growing more and more real, that powerful pressure seemingly about to materialize. Xiaoda's complexion was even uglier, so pale that it was devoid of blood. His sensitivity to this aura was far greater than that of a human expert. This qi was clearly not completely mature, but it seemed to originate from a most primordial wilderness, imbued with an ancient and leisurely aura. To humans, this qi was powerful and terrifying, but to demi-humans, this qi directly crushed down on their souls, making it impossible for them to even think of resisting or have the courage to do so. Xiaoda's body incessantly trembled. Logically speaking, even if he was no match for this black-clothed girl, he should at least be able to slow her down a little. Yet no matter how he mobilized his true essence, strengthened his will, or even went berserk, he could not gather enough courage. He did not even dare to take a single step forward. This innate pressure between living beings was truly too terrifying. The fact that he could still remain in the lane, still stand, not kneel in the snow, was proof of his strength and pride. But this was still far from enough. The black-clothed girl noticed the existence of this demi-human and turned her head to glance at him, somewhat interested. Under her gaze, Xiaoda's soul seemed to be scorched by sacred flames. Fear surged out of his eyes, and he no longer dared to linger. He suddenly turned and vanished into the darkness. Not long after Xiaoda vanished, a leisurely sigh came from the darkness. A hint of wariness appeared on the black-clothed girl's face. Nothing happened. After that sigh, there was no other sound. On the bridge of helplessness, some 14 li from this place, the demi-human empress, Madame Mu, boarded a carriage pulled by a 7-colored deer and began to drive out of the capital. On the snowy shore of the Orthodox Academy, Shang Xingzhou turned to look in the direction of the bridge of helplessness. He slightly arched his brows in surprise. The departure of Madame Mu and the demi-human diplomatic mission meant that from this moment onwards, White Emperor City would maintain its neutrality between the Great Zhou imperial court and the orthodoxy. Why had there been such a large change? It had to be known that this was highly likely to alter the situation of the entire continent. It was naturally because of that black-clothed girl who had arrived against the wind and snow. Unlike the proud and aloof heavenly phoenix, the dragon race had written far too many stories on the continent. To the demi-humans, the dragon race, which had not appeared in the world for a very long time, was still their deeply rooted belief, their spiritual sustenance. Moreover, it was said that the demi-humans on the two shores of the Red River had a very close relationship with the black frost dragons that allowed them to establish their country. The walls of the Orthodox Academy were broken and the black-clothed girl walked in. Some blue-clothed Taoists stood in the snow, forming a seemingly messy but actually almost perfect formation. She could sense the strength of these humans, and then she saw the middle-aged Taoist on the other side of the lake. She had been imprisoned at the bottom of the well of New North Bridge for several centuries, but she had still seen many human experts, like Wang Jitsa, Qin Zhong, the Tianhai Divine Empress, the Pope, and Su Li. But in reality, she was only afraid of Su Li and Tianhai, because these two truly did dare to kill her. Now, there was one more human that made her feel a faint fear. She was somewhat nervous, but she did not stop walking. She walked across the lake and came to Chun Changsheng's side. She cleared her throat and said, "Hello, I am your protector." Chapter 736. Before speaking, she first cleared her throat. She appeared very calm, even playful like a child. But Shang Xingzhou and Chun Changsheng could both hear the slight tremble in her voice. It was not because she was excited to meet Chun Changsheng with her free body, but because she was uneasy. She felt that she was too close to the middle-aged Taoist, somewhat dangerous. At this moment, she still did not know that this person was Chun Changsheng's master, but she could clearly sense that he had the ability to harm or even kill her. There were very few human experts in the world that had the ability to harm or even kill her. But tonight, just as she had escaped her imprisonment of several hundred years, she had encountered one. This made her feel a sense of defeat, as if she was facing her fate, so much so that she did not dare to glance at Shang Xingzhou. She only stared into Chun Changsheng's eyes, seeming especially serious and focused. She had no idea that in Shang Xingzhou's eyes, she was also an extremely dangerous existence. The records of the humans in the Taoist canon clearly stated that one could never be too wary of the dragon race, the highest level of creatures under the starry sky. Moreover, she was a black frost dragon with the noblest and strongest bloodline of the dragon race. Her petite body was brimming with energy that countless human experts dreamed of, but could never possess. If she learned to use that energy, or if that energy were to just passively explode, it would assuredly create a terrifying momentum and bitter consequences. She feared Shang Xingzhou, and Shang Xingzhou was wary of her. Qin Changsheng was only very shocked. He had not expected that she had actually escaped from the bottom of the well. Even if he and Su Yorong had used the correct method, his blood, driven by the sublimation of the scripture of flowing west, was constantly being corroded by time. Based on his calculations, it would still take at least 2 years for the chain to snap. Moreover, after leaving the underground world, why had she not hurriedly left this continent brimming with the aura of humans that she disliked the most and returned to the warm archipelago in the south? Why had she come to the Orthodox Academy? There were many variables in this negotiation, and they were faintly advantageous to him, but Qin Changsheng was not happy. He did not want anyone or anything other than himself to participate in this negotiation, whether it was the priests of the Li Palace, the teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy, Mount Lian Scholarly Manor, or his worried senior brother in the Dark Palace. And what did she mean by those words? Protector? Chun Changsheng recalled the relevant records in the 7th book of the Taoist canon, the Covenant of Dawn, and then he recalled a few matters of the past that the Pope had seemingly inadvertently mentioned that night. Whether it was the orthodoxy or the Taoist faith of the past, if they wanted to preserve their Taoist orthodoxy that would never change for 10,000 generations, they would inevitably place great importance on their inheritances. The current Pope would often begin his plans many years in advance, educating and raising his disciples. Those young disciples possessed incredible talent in cultivation and astonishing potential, but if they wanted to grow into true experts capable of leading the Taoist sect forward, they still needed a very long time and many trials. Moreover, the number of orthodox disciples of the Taoist sect had always been very small. For example, in the previous generation, there was only the Pope and Shang Xingzhou. In this generation, there was only Yuan Chun, Changsheng, and Shang Xingzhou, who had used some unknown method to confirm his identity, Mu Jiushi. With such a long and arduous journey of cultivation and such a small number of successors, logically speaking, the inheritance of the Tao sect could be cut off at any time. However, for countless years, Taoism had been passed down for countless generations, and such a situation had never occurred. Apart from the fact that those successors were as amazing as Yin and Shang, there was another very important reason. When these young successors traveled the world to cultivate, Taoism would often invite an extremely powerful or extremely influential senior to be that successor's guardian. The Taoist orthodoxy had existed for tens of thousands of years, and this rule had also been maintained for many generations, even longer than the Great Zhou dynasty. If Chen Changsheng had lived in Xining Village's old temple as a legitimate disciple of the orthodoxy, then he truly should have had a guardian, and that guardian would assuredly be one of the few experts of the continent, most likely one of the storms of the eight directions. But at the time, no one on the continent knew of his identity. Now that he was the Pope, did he still need a guardian? And why was it her? So the person he spoke of was you. Shang Xingzhou's expression was calm, not at all surprised. It was obvious that he had already known of this matter. He looked at the little black dragon and said, "After several hundred years, you can finally leave that old well of New North Bridge and regain your freedom. Why don't you return to the Southern Sea? Because this is my promise." The little black dragon stood in front of Chen Changsheng and solemnly said. It was obvious that Shang Xingzhou had placed an enormous pressure on her. Her small face was filled with nervousness, but it was still determined. Shang Xingzhou suddenly asked, "Will you protect him?" She raised her face and proudly said, "Of course." Shang Xingzhou continued, "Are you willing to become one with him before the starry sky? To love him, to respect him, to comfort him, to love him as if you were yourself, to always place his name before your own in sickness and health, in wealth and poverty, in success and failure, all the way until you leave this world and return to the sea of stars." These words were like a cool breeze, slowly arriving, but also like a clap of thunder, rumbling without end. This was one of the most ancient words in the scriptures of the church. This was the oath of a guardian. This was a rule of the Li Palace. After a moment of silence, she said, "I am willing." Shang Xingzhou asked, "Even if you have to give up your life?" Without the slightest hesitation, she answered, "Yes." Several years ago, at the bottom of New North Bridge, she had already given up something more important than her life for Chen Changsheng, at least in her view. Of course, this did not mean that she was truly willing to die for Chen Changsheng without any conditions, nor did it mean that she was not afraid of death. As members of the dragon race with their long lives, death was something they rarely considered, but it was precisely because their lives were so long that when they occasionally thought of it, they would feel a fear that far surpassed that of ordinary humans. She stared into Shang Xingzhou's eyes and said, "Not even Wang Jisoo dared to kill me back then, only to imprison me. I don't believe that you would dare to kill me." In the common understanding of the cultivation world, the dragon race was often immortal. The main reason for this impression that went against the truth was that the dragon race was the highest level of life below the starry sky. They possessed an incomparably long lifespan and unimaginably powerful strength. Moreover, countless years ago, when the dragon race withdrew from the continent, they formed a pact with the other worlds. Any life form that offended the dragon race must die. The main reason that this pact had been passed down to this day was not because the demon race or the human race attached great importance to this promise, but because the dragon race was powerful. Whether it was the peak experts of the demon race or the human race, even if they were facing a lone or even weak dragon, they would rarely try to do anything. This was because every dragon had a soul pearl in its body. Once the dragon was killed, the soul pearl would shatter, and its clansmen in the distant south would sense it and carry out a frenzied vengeance. Not even the great Zhou dynasty ruled by Emperor Taizong was willing to pay this price. When the little black dragon wreaked havoc everywhere, Wang Zhisu had used a scheme to capture her, but he had never killed her. Besides her being forgivable, an even more important reason was that she was not easy to kill and was not easy to kill. These two words of not easy to kill naturally had different meanings. For countless years, the dragon race had always been an object of reverence, far from the continent. But at certain moments in history, a few accidents would occasionally occur. Chapter 737. This so-called accident was because a few human or demon experts had appeared on the continent at the time. Those experts were far too powerful, so powerful that they were somewhat excessive. They even surprised the entire world and did not place the dragon race in their eyes at all. For example, the legendary Grand Scholar Tungus of the demon race was especially fond of using dragon blood to conduct research. In his long and dull life, countless dragons had died in that laboratory in Shualao City that could not see the sun but was always aimed at the moon. Some of the weaker black frost dragons would even drop out of the sky and fright upon hearing his name. Another example was the previous master of the Mountain Sea Sword, who had once engaged in vicious battles with several evil dragons in the mountains and seas. It was said that the sea that had been dyed red later on produced particularly precious sea cucumbers. Another example was the strongest black frost dragon in the past 1,000 years that obtained the friendship of the demon lord in Shualao City was ultimately transformed by Zhou Dufu into that mountain range in the Garden of Zhou. Another example was that person called Su Li. Back in the snowy hot springs, when the little black dragon first laid eyes on Su Li, she had almost been scared to death. She could clearly sense that this person had once killed many dragons. Those who dared to slay dragons were not necessarily true warriors, because they could fail. Only those who succeeded in slaying dragons could be called powerful. Then what did someone like Su Li, who had made a special trip to the distant southern sea to ascertain just how powerful the dragon race was and had slain countless dragons with his sword? Fine, he had always been an indescribable accident, an exception that bordered on madness. He could not be judged by common sense. The little black dragon did not know who Shang Xingzhou was, but she could sense that this powerful Taoist priest was also an accident, so she had purposely mentioned that matter of the past. In her view, even if the vicious reputation of the dragon race could not frighten him into retreating, the mention of a legendary name like Wang Zhizi should at least make him feel deep veneration. Shang Xingzhou's response was very calm and indifferent, completely beyond her expectations. The rumors say that you have a very cruel personality, often eating people at the slightest disagreement. After you came ashore from the south, countless villages and cities were turned into ruins by you. He calmly looked at her, like an elder looking at a naughty child. He indifferently said, "But when I saw you in the Frostflower shop, I knew that the rumors were not true." The Frostflower shop was a very obscure place in the capital. Qin Changxing knew it, because Mo Yan's orange garden was there. Ordinary people would find it very difficult to remember. But how could the little black dragon forget? Hundreds of years ago, she was captured by the experts of the imperial court of the great Zhou dynasty. She lay powerlessly on the ground, gasping for breath. The surface of the bridge was covered with a thin layer of frost. That damned scholar, surnamed Wang, walked over from the other end of the bridge. The footprints he left behind were like blooming flowers. That was how the Frostflower shop got its name. Back then, you saw me. The little black dragon looked at Shang Xingzhou, the unease and fear in her heart transforming into an intense wariness. Of course I've seen you before. The chains that Wang Zhizi used to bind you were borrowed from me. Shang Xingzhou looked down at her feet. Between her feet was a chain that looked a little short, but was actually very long. It formed a sharp contrast with the white snow. She stepped barefoot on the snow-covered grass, as if she couldn't feel the cold. But when she heard Shang Xingzhou's words, she felt cold. Shang Xingzhou continued, "This chain is a treasure of the Li Palace. Junior brother was able to pull out of the wall, but he couldn't break it. The little black dragon and Qin Changsheng silently glanced at each other. It was said that time was the most powerful and history the heaviest, and all this heaviest strength was contained in Shang Xingzhou's words. The elder of heavenly secrets had passed away, the Pope had returned to the Sea of Stars, the demon lord had fallen into the abyss, and Wang Jitze had secluded himself from the world. There was no one left who had the right to speak to him about the past. From this perspective, he was history, was time. It was just that in those past years, he had not written down his name. My companions and comrades have died one after another, and there's still one hiding in the mountains like a ghost, so I can no longer continue to hide. Shang Xingzhou looked at the two of them, feeling rather emotional, as if he was thinking of some story from long ago. He leisurely said, "Because we are both protectors." Qin Changsheng understood what he meant. No matter how much mutual deception and cruel schemes there were, no one could deny that at the very beginning, Emperor Taizong and the ministers of the Lingyan Pavilion were a group of complete idealists. They had thrown away their heads and spilled their blood in order to put an end to the chaos of the world, to expel the demons, and to become the protectors of the continent. Shang Xingzhou was not only a witness to that magnificent era, but also a person who had personally experienced it. He had always been one of these idealists. His reputation was not prominent, but he played an extremely important role. Emperor Taizu had allied with the current pope. Emperor Taizong had ultimately obtained the full support of the Li Palace in the coup of the 100 Garden and those cruel stories related to the Lingyan Pavilion. Presumably, they all had something to do with him. Those comrades and companions of the past had either died, been killed by Emperor Taizong and him, or left. In short, after a long 1,000 years, he was the only one left. Even if he was the only one left, it was precisely because he was the only one left that he naturally had to shoulder the fates and responsibilities of his companions. He wanted to become the protector of the continent. He wanted to carry out Emperor Taizong's final decree. He wanted to realize the ideals of his companions. The human race would be unified, the demon race would bow their heads, and the world would be united for thousands of generations. No one can stop me, and no one should stop me, including you, Shang Xingzhou calmly and firmly said to Qin Changsheng. Qin Changsheng didn't know what to say. At this moment, the cry of a crane resounded through the night sky. A white crane had returned from the south and answered in his place. A gentle wind blew. It was very cold to ordinary people, but to the two people and one dragon beneath the great banyan tree, it could only be considered cool and refreshing. The snow on the lake rustled in the wind like withered leaves that had long ago been buried at the bottom of the snow. The starless night was not cold, nor was it dark, because no matter how the court changed, the lights of the 10,000 households of the capital would always illuminate the world. It had already been countless years. The white crane had brought with it a letter from Su Yorong, expressing Holy Maiden Peak's fearless stance. Madame Mu left in her deer carriage, expressing White Emperor City's stance. The stances of Mount Li and Scholatry Manor did not need to be asked. As for the most crucial orthodoxy, even if many people were willing to support Shang Xingzhou in front of the Pope's final decree, who would dare to openly oppose him? After a somewhat oppressive silence, Shang Xingzhou spoke once more. When I picked you up by the stream, I once said that your fate was very bad. He looked at Qin Changsheng and said, "Now it seems that I was wrong." The young Taoist from Xining village had now become the youngest pope in all of history. In his mother's womb, his sun will have been destroyed, so he should not have lived past 20. But now his meridians have been rebuilt, his star openings perfect, and his path of cultivation was smooth and level. He had the support of the entire orthodoxy, the support of many factions, and even a protector. Anyone could see that his fate was very good and worthy of praise. And then? Chapter 738. In the past, Qin Changsheng's fate was very bad, but later on his fate was very good. To put it another way, his fate had been changed. On that night, at the peak of the Mausoleum of Books, the Tianhai Divine Empress had defied the heavens and changed his fate. From that moment on, his path of cultivation was smooth. The shadow that had hung over his head for tensome years vanished, leaving only light. Of course, as his fate and status changed, he encountered some new trials that he could never have imagined back then. Even with the divine staff in hand, becoming master of the orthodoxy was still extremely difficult. Fortunately, the Pope had already made many arrangements for him upon his return to the Sea of Stars, already smoothing out the road ahead as much as possible. From a certain perspective, the Pope had also changed his fate. In order to place this mighty legacy in Chen Chongqing's hands, the Pope had made an extremely meticulous and appropriate design. Putting aside the rainbow in the palace or the figure that had vanished from the prayer mat in the orange garden, just the starlight in the well of New North Bridge and the 3 green leaves on the stone wall were enough to show his painstaking care. The Pope had chosen the little black dragon to be Chen Chongqing's protector, naturally, because she was sufficiently powerful. Besides experts of the divine domain, there were few people on the continent that could defeat her. However, an even more important reason was still her identity. She was the princess of the Black Frost Dragon tribe that had helped the demi-human race establish their kingdom countless years ago. The White Emperor couple had probably known a long time ago that a Black Frost Dragon had been imprisoned near the imperial city by the humans, but they had never expressed any opinion on this matter. Perhaps it was because it had been too long ago, or perhaps it was because the so-called sentiment could never rival value. The Pope did not care about this and directly rescued her, forcing White Emperor City to accept this favor. Even if the White Emperor couple wanted to pretend to be deaf and mute, the tribes and elders on the 2 shores of the Red River would not agree. The Pope had always conducted himself like the bright moon and cool wind. In his entire life, he had never played with any schemes, but he had still lived in this world for 1,000 years and had a deep understanding of human nature. There was no difference between the demi-human race and the human race in this aspect. He had calculated correctly. The little black dragon left the well of New North Bridge and walked through the snowstorm to the Orthodox Academy. Madame Moose sighed and rode the 7-colored deer carriage out of the capital. Even now, Chen Chongqing still could not completely understand the Pope's painstaking care. He was too young. Even though he was well-read in the Taoist canon and remembered many legends and stories, he found it very difficult to connect them to the present. Therefore, after hearing Shang Xingzhou's next few words, he was still stunned for a long time before he understood the meaning behind it. Do you know who Yin's protector was? I don't know. Chen Xuanba. This was an answer that no one would have thought of. Over the past 1,000 years, there were only 2 names that shined the brightest on this continent. One was Zhou Dufu, the other was Emperor Taizong. But before Chen Xuanba died, no one dared to say that Zhou Dufu and Emperor Taizong could dominate this world. Compared to the long river of history in the past 10 years, which seemed abnormally short, he had been able to compete with these 2 people in different fields. Each of them was outstanding, dazzling, and brilliant. Such a person could be said to be unparalleled in the world. Even if the Pope had been a legitimate successor of the Taoist faith, logically speaking, he still did not have the right to have such an extraordinary hegemon act as his protector, unless there was something hidden in this matter. Chen Xuanba should be your ancestor. It's even possible that you are the essence blood he left in this world to rebuild yourself. Thus, Yin is repaying his debt. Shang Xingzhou asked, "Do you understand his meaning now?" Chen Chongsheng was quiet for a very long time, then nodded his head. The Pope's love and pity could come from many places, like repaying a debt, or feeling guilty, or a promise. In this aspect, he had not thought too deeply about it, but he had always understood the meaning behind the Pope's arrangements. His master did not like him and wanted him dead, but this did not mean that he also wanted him dead. This also meant that he and Shang Xingzhou did not necessarily have to fight to the death. If he continued to stay in the capital, he would assuredly become a source of unrest, unless he decided to lead the orthodoxy in war against the imperial court. He naturally would not do this, because he could not find any reason. Did he want to seize his senior brother's imperial throne? As for Sin, he was well aware that Shang Xingzhou had enough confidence in this aspect to answer his questions. The imperial court had just been established, so even if he wanted to do evil, he still did not have a chance. The ugly sin currently lay with Zhou Tong, and regardless of Chen Chongqing's emotional inclinations, Zhou Tong's sin should be placed more on the Tianhai Divine Empress. Chen Chongqing turned to Shang Xingzhou and asked, "And sir, does sir understand martial uncle's meaning?" Shang Xingzhou said nothing. After that long night of conversation and today, when he saw the little dragon walk out of the snowstorm, he completely understood Yin's meaning. Just when did longevity become an obstacle in his heart? Perhaps it should also be calculated from that night in the Mausoleum of Books? That year, when he had picked up or received the infant in the wooden basin by the stream, he had lamented that his fate was not good, because he already knew of his fate. Before Chen Chongqing was born, his sun will had collapsed, and then the people of the other continent had poured an unimaginable amount of sacred light into his body. It was impossible for him to live past the age of 20. When he said to Chen Chongqing that he would defy the heavens and change his fate, he had naturally been deceiving him. He had never imagined that Chen Chongqing could successfully defy the heavens and change his fate. No matter how astonishing his talent was, after leaving Xining village, he was still only a few years away from the age of 20. Even if Zhou Dufu were reborn and Wang Jitze were corrupted, how could they possibly accomplish such a feat? Reality proved that his view was correct. Even after the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, Chen Chongqing was still unable to defy the heavens and change his fate, not even a sliver of hope. He believed that Chen Chongqing would die, be eaten by Tianhai, or die of old age, but who could have imagined that Tianhai would surpass everyone's expectations and make such a choice? If this was a game of chess that he had arranged, then Tianhai's death would be the decisive move. He believed that he had already obtained victory in this game. But when he looked at the chessboard, he was shocked to discover that a chess piece that should have been dead was still perfectly fine on the chessboard. The chess piece that should have been dead was still alive, and the seemingly uninteresting endgame instantly began to undergo countless changes. This chess piece on the chessboard seemed to have already transcended the boundaries of the chessboard. This made Shang Xingzhou feel extremely uneasy and wary. Thus, on the divine path in the morning sun, he made a decision. He wanted Chen Chongqing to die as quickly as possible, wanted this chess piece to disappear as quickly as possible. So on the divine path, he did not even glance at Chen Chongqing. Thus, there were so many things that happened afterwards. It was only after that long night of conversation that he vaguely understood. Because of the relationship between this chess piece and him, because of the Tao that he cultivated, he had placed too much importance on this chess piece and had used up too much of his energy. Yin had spoken correctly. Since they hated each other, meeting was better than not seeing each other. Shang Xingzhou turned and walked out of the Orthodox Academy. Just like that time on the divine path of the Mausoleum of Books, he did not glance at Chen Chongqing again. The tensome blue-clothed Taoists followed him out. All of this had happened too suddenly, without the slightest warning. Just then, a voice rang out in Chen Chongqing's sea of consciousness without the slightest warning. Go a little further. Don't let the capital see. Don't let the world see. Don't let me see. Chapter 739. It was Shang Xingzhou's voice. Don't let the capital see. Don't let the world see. Don't let him see. What if he saw? Everyone knew that the unspoken words must have something to do with death. Chen Chongqing didn't say anything. He looked at the night sky and the wind and snow. His eyes were bright and calm. In his heart, there was a saying that had to do with returning. The snowstorm in the night did not become stronger, nor did it become lighter. The countless cavalrymen around the Tradition Academy were still vigilantly facing off against each other. When Shang Xingzhou returned to the palace, the green-robed Taoists bowed respectfully and left. He stood in the wind and snow and looked at the young emperor's silhouette cut by the light in the side window of the main hall. He had a gratified expression. Everything was worth it in the end. There was a rustling sound in the snow. It was the sound of boots stepping on the soft snow. Priest Xin came up behind him and said something in a low voice. He seemed especially humble. After Mei Lisha returned to the Sea of Stars, the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education never welcomed a new master. This church had a very special position in the orthodoxy, and its hidden strength was extremely powerful. Even Mao Qiuyu found it inconvenient to act as its guardian, so he could only temporarily act as its guardian for a few months. In the eyes of many people, priest Xian, who was deeply trusted by Mei Lisha and had a close relationship with the Orthodox Academy, was the one most likely to be in charge of the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education. It was just that his seniority was a little lacking. No one knew that priest Xian actually had another identity. He was a secret agent of the department for purging officials. And no one knew that a few days ago, when Zhou Tong was being pursued, the person who had pulled out the zither strings of Zhou Prison's underground array and forced Zhou Tong out was also him. The reason was very simple. Priest Xian, who had a bright future ahead of him, could not possibly be willing to continue being Zhou Tong's dog. He hoped that Zhou Tong would die. Of course, if he hadn't received some sort of promise or guarantee, his courage would have come a little later. The capital will be fine for now, and the Li Palace will be fine for 3 years. There's not much meaning in you guarding the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education. Shang Xingzhou said, "Go to the south for me and see the situation at Holy Maiden Peak and Mount Li. In addition, tell the longevity sect to deliver that item I want." Priest Xian was a bit shocked. He didn't know what the longevity sect wanted to give to the venerable Taoist, but he didn't say anything. He accepted the order and quickly disappeared into the wind and snow. The snow on the surface of the lake had been swept away by the cold wind, revealing a smooth surface of ice. Reflecting the lights in the distance, it looked like a large piece of colored glass. There were some small dots on top of the glass, which were the footprints she had left behind earlier. Perhaps it was because seeing the lake frozen into glass, Chun Chong Sheng thought of something very important to her. "Did you bring the luminous pearls and treasures with you?" In the underground cavern at the bottom of New Northbridge as well, the stone walls were inlaid with over 1,000 incomparably rare night pearls, and the ground was piled with mountains of gold and silver. These were the little black dragon's treasures, the greatest source of mental energy that had allowed her to endure for several hundred years. Chun Chong Sheng clearly knew how important these things were to her, so he reminded her. "Of course I did." The little black dragon patted its belly, its heroic spirit reaching the clouds. It was like a man who had just drunk 80 bowls of strong wine. In human form, she was very petite, 2 heads shorter than Chun Chong Sheng. She looked like a little girl of 11 or 12. So this action was unavoidably rather comical. Of course, it was also very cute. Chun Chong Sheng knew that her black clothes were dragon scales. They could not be separated, nor could they store too many things. Moreover, she did not have a spatial artifact, so he couldn't help but be very curious as to where she had hidden those things. "You really are stupid to death." The little black dragon was rather angry. Patting its belly, it said, "I already said it was here." Only now did Chun Chong Sheng notice that her belly was slightly bulging, just like a gluttonous child. As it turned out, she had actually swallowed those 1,000-some luminous pearls and the unimaginable amount of gold and silver and coral into her belly. In the next few years, he wouldn't have to worry about not having enough money to use. But did he have to make her spit it out every time he used it? Chun Chong Sheng felt that this was rather unclean, and then he very naturally realized that there was another way besides spitting it out. He instantly felt uneasy. Don't let your imagination run wild. The little black dragon very quickly reacted and roared. "If you dare let your imagination run wild again, I'll swallow you in one gulp." Chun Chong Sheng thought to himself, "If you really do swallow me, you'll still have to spit it out in the end," or something like that. His complexion grew even more unsightly. The little black dragon still very quickly understood. Her complexion was even more unsightly than his as she slowly raised her fist. This fist was very delicate. In the snowstorm, it seemed like a lonely plum blossom, truly pitiful. Boom! A peal of thunder boomed through the Orthodox Academy. The ground quaked, and the snow on the great banyan tree rustled down. Several cracks appeared on the surface of the lake, and where the cracks intersected was the surface of the water. In the floating shards of ice, one could faintly make out a person. She grabbed that person and carried him back to the library. Due to the need to protect the books, The lamps and candles in the library were all specially made, so their temperature was relatively low. No matter how many lamps there were, no matter how long they were, it was still very difficult to dry the soaked clothes. Chun Chong Sheng sat amidst several dozen lamps, the cold water of the lake incessantly flowing onto the pitch-black floor. To be thrown into the frozen lake with a single punch, his entire body soaked and the cold biting into his bones. No matter how one looked at it, this was a very sorrowful matter, one very worthy of anger. He did not feel these emotions because his body that had undergone perfect purification could endure this sort of heavy blow. After reaching perfect star condensation, the ordinary cold and heat of the world were simply incapable of assaulting his body and mind. Of course, the primary reason was that she was currently acting rather strangely. Based on her personality, the black-clothed girl that should have been proud of herself was now sitting across from him, her head lowered in dejection, even faintly sorrowful. "What's wrong? My strength has decreased. Perhaps it's because I just escaped and still haven't gotten used to it." "No." She looked at the chain tied to her ankle and said, "If I can't cut this chain, I'll never be able to defeat your master." Chun Chongsheng finally understood that this was what she was worried about and comforted her. "Even if you cut this chain, you still won't be able to defeat him." She was very angry, yelling, "Are you trying to comfort someone?" Chun Chongsheng earnestly replied, "Yes, because this is an objective fact. When I was a child, a golden dragon wanted to eat me, but it was driven away by my master. In the dragon race, the golden dragon and the black frost dragons were the noblest and most powerful. Countless years ago, when the golden dragon race left the continent, the black frost dragons reigned supreme. The golden dragon he spoke of, according to Senior Yu Ren's later description, was probably a member of the golden dragon race, and it was highly likely to have been a member of the true imperial clan. That golden dragon was naturally countless times stronger than the current black dragon, but it was still not a match for his master. In his view, there was truly no need for the little black dragon to be sad over not being able to defeat his master. Who would be sad over not being able to chase after the sun? Who would? Of course, it was those brave, or perhaps crazy, sun chasers. Her gaze fell on the dagger at his waist. The first time she saw this dagger, she had sensed a vast, familiar chi that was worthy of reverence or vigilance. Later on, when she heard Chun Chongsheng speak of the events of the past, she confirmed that this dagger was the third whisker of the Golden Dragon. To be able to defeat a member of the Golden Dragon Imperial clan, and even take its most precious third whisker and use it as a weapon, just how powerful and confident must that person be? From that moment on, she knew that Chun Chongsheng's master was a very frightening human. If possible, she naturally would not make an enemy of this human, but from today onwards, I am your protector. That powerful human wants to kill you, so I naturally have to think of a way to defeat him and then kill him. So I'm a little sad. Chapter 740. Sadness was just an emotion, not despair. The black dragon lowered its head and gazed at the footprints in the snow, quickly beginning to think and calculate. Back then, when the golden colossal dragon imperial family returned from the foreign continent and broke through the crystal wall, how much power did they lose? Shang Xingzhou was able to defeat it easily because he had the home advantage, and he must have made preparations in advance. How could he accurately judge this person's true realm through this battle? If his chains were unlocked, how many chances would he have of defeating this person? Chun Chongsheng guessed what she was thinking and said, "Don't think about it anymore." The little black dragon raised her head and stared into his eyes. "The Pope has made me your protector, so there must be some meaning behind it." Neither she nor Chun Chongsheng knew that the Pope had rescued her from New Northbridge and made her protector primarily because of the complicated relationship between the Black Frost Dragon tribe and White Emperor City. Hearing the term guardian again, Chun Chongsheng was silent for a while, then suddenly said, "Do you know who my master's guardian was?" The black dragon shook her head. Chun Chongsheng looked at the direction where the man just disappeared in the wind and snow and said, "That night, Marshal Uncle told me. Master didn't choose a guardian." A strange light flashed through the little black dragon's eyes. Chun Chongsheng continued, Master believes that cultivating the Tao cannot rely on external objects, nor can he rely on others. Only relying on himself is enough. The black dragon said nothing. Such a person was too terrifying. Dawn came after the night. Wind and snow still enveloped the capital, and the continent welcomed a new year. Many important events occurred on the first day of the new year. For example, the Great Zhou dynasty officially changed its era name, and the Li Palace welcomed a new master. At the Li Palace's New Year's ceremony, something happened that shocked the entire continent. According to the will left behind by the Pope and the announcement of the orthodoxy, which had already been announced to the world in advance, Qin Changsheng became the new Pope. However, he did not appear at the New Year's ceremony. His figure could not be seen in the Light Palace. Naturally, there was no so-called coronation ceremony. This news gave rise to countless shocked discussions. Whether it was the priests of the Li Palace, the teachers and students of the Ivy Academies, or the common people of the capital, they all felt extremely perplexed and then very uneasy. Amidst the confusion, the Li Palace gave an authoritative explanation. The notice had the blood seals of the 5 leaders and Qin Changsheng's personal signature. Because the Pope was too young and had not cultivated for long enough, he decided to enter the world to cultivate and comprehend the heavenly Tao in the world of mortals. When will you be back? No one knew, and there was no answer in the bulletin. It was clearly written that the Pope could return to the capital at any time to ascend the throne. The Pope was not in the Li Palace, but had concealed his identity and secluded himself in the world. This was the first time something like this had happened in history. Shock and confusion filled the entire capital and even the entire continent, so much so that many people did not remember what the new era name of the Great Zhou dynasty was. When these emotions were finally somewhat diluted by time, people looked back at the year that had just passed and thought back to what the previous pope had done. Only then did they vaguely understand something. All of this had been arranged by the previous pope. If Qin Changsheng stayed in the capital, it would make the imperial court feel extremely uneasy. This kind of uneasiness would inevitably lead to the outbreak of war. His departure from Jingdou would make the court, more accurately, it would make Shang Xingzhou feel much more at ease. Even now, only a few people understood why Shang Xingzhou would be so wary of, reject, and loathe Qin Changsheng's existence. Just as Qin Changsheng had understood long ago, just as Shang Xingzhou had sighed last night in the snowstorm of the Orthodox Academy, if they hated each other, they would not meet. Give this master and disciple some time, some distance. Give the imperial court and the orthodoxy some time, some distance. Give the world and its people a chance. It did not need to be a war, did not need to be decided in a moment of life and death. Qin Changsheng was still the pope, but he could not stay in the capital, could not stay in the Li Palace. Even if this endgame would ultimately end in a battle to the death, there would at least be some leeway to place a chess piece. Problems that could not be resolved now could be resolved in the future, perhaps when both sides possessed even more wisdom. This was the previous pope's arrangement, and now it seemed that it was also the best method of resolving the problem. Of course, the previous pope's arrangements had naturally included even more details, so that even if Qin Changsheng left the capital, the Li Palace could still maintain its stance. This never-before-seen situation, with its extremely complex causes and conditions, was a perfect manifestation of the Pope's wisdom and patience. As a successor, what Qin Changsheng needed to do now was to accept this arrangement and continue to increase his wisdom and patience, as well as his strength. He needed to rely on his wisdom and patience to survive. As long as he lived, he was the Pope. Once the mountain flowers bloomed, they could talk about it again. Not everyone could understand this matter, and even fewer people could understand the painstaking thought that had gone into the previous pope's arrangements, as well as the resolve and boldness that the Li Palace had displayed through this matter. When their shock faded, they saw that the truth was very simple. Qin Changsheng had succeeded as pope, but he had been driven out of the capital. Anyone could see this as a victory for the imperial court. Many people believe that Shang Xingzhou was unwilling to declare war on the orthodoxy, unwilling to reject the Pope's final decree, so he was making a gesture of leniency. Leniency was naturally condescension. A pope that was not in the Lee Palace was only in name, no matter how one looked at it. It was even more dismal than being only in name. This was an exiled pope. The era of the Orthodox era had officially come to an end. The Tianhai Divine Empress's rule over the continent had become a page in the annals of history that had been turned over. The Great Zhou dynasty had formally changed to a new country. The confluence of the North and South had been declared a success. When spring returned to the earth, countless matters would be put into practice. There were already many cultivators that had been decreed to come from the south to the north and join the various armies. The demon empress had been executed. The demon lord had been executed. Shuilao City had fallen into internal strife. The pope had passed away, and all things had changed. The future of the continent was bright. The human race would undoubtedly welcome the best era since Emperor Taizong. No one knew that on an ordinary and uneventful winter day, the new pope, Chen Changsheng, left the Orthodox Academy. He left Hundred Flowers Lane, merged into the crowd, and walked along the Luo River. He crossed the bridge of helplessness and the stone pillars in front of the Li Palace, exited the city gate, and left the capital. He carried a letter in his bosom, a sword at his waist, and an umbrella in his hand. At his side was a girl dressed in black. The girl had a fresh and pleasant appearance, but her face was expressionless, making her seem particularly cold. In her bosom was a pot of green leaves. Chen Changsheng did not walk very fast, but the girl was very petite. If she wanted to keep up with him, she had to walk faster. As she walked, her black hair rose and fell in the cold wind. The green leaves in her bosom also rose and fell. These were not two oars swaying in the spring wind, but the appearance that she and the world should have. When I first wrote the Pope's Green Leaves, I had lion in mind. I wanted to write this scene, so the little black dragon's name really should have been Matilda. Chapter 741. From the beginning of the new era, the entire continent only cared about one matter. It was not the exiled Pope, not the closing of Holy Maiden Peak, not Wang Po's return to Scholartree Manor. That matter was more important than all of them combined. The demons were invading. In the autumn of the year before last, the demon lord had died, Nank had left, and a new monarch had been installed. The demons were in chaos. Shuilao City was covered in blood, and the weather was abnormally cold. Winter had come early, the wind and snow intertwined, and the harvest was abnormally poor. Countless small demon tribes had been forced to leave Shuilao City, and the wolf cavalry that the demon palace valued the most was produced less than a third of what it had been in the past. Anyone could see that the demons were at their weakest. No one could have imagined that the demons would choose this moment to launch a large-scale invasion. The word large-scale implied madness and disregard of all costs. Perhaps the crisis of survival brought about by the wind and cold had transformed into the demons' thirst for blood. There was another very important reason. The demon crown prince, Han Qing, had guarded the mausoleum of books for more than 600 years. Finally, he had left the capital, traversed the vast snowy plains, and returned to Shuilao City. According to his agreement with Shang Xingzhou, White Emperor City had used some secret method to send him to Shuilao City, where he had contacted a few members of the Council of Elders who had always been loyal to him. Through the intelligence from the Demon Palace, he was once more convinced that the true ruler of the demon domain was not the new demon lord of the Demon Palace, but the demon commander and that mysterious military advisor Blackrobe. He believed that although the demon commander and Blackrobe had worked together to overthrow his father, the demon lord who had once dominated the continent, this did not mean that they truly trusted each other. On the contrary, without the shadow in the sky, the trust between the two could evaporate at any moment. They would inevitably be wary of each other, even ready to attack at any moment. As for the young demon lord of the Demon Palace, he was just a pitiful puppet, like a blade of grass swaying between two gusts of wind. At any moment, he could be caught in the crossfire and die. Han Qing wanted to use the tense relationship between the demon commander and Blackrobe. For historical reasons, he could not work with Blackrobe, so it was only right that he first contacted the demon commander. He knew that the demon commander would not completely trust him, but he did not care. The person he truly wanted to work with was the young demon lord. That child was isolated and helpless in the demon palace, and was presumably in constant fear. If he could obtain the support of the child and the power behind him, he would assuredly be ecstatic. Moreover, they were blood brothers. In hindsight, Han Qing's thinking was not wrong. It could even be said that he was absolutely right. The demon race was not the human race. They viewed the world from a different perspective, but there was not much difference between the two in essence. The only things that determined the direction of things were interests, trust, and the innate strength of the relationship between them. Han Qing had failed because his judgment had been wrong from the start. There really might be a problem between the demon commander and Black Robe, but the young demon lord was not the lonely puppet he had imagined. In truth, it was only after his death that the entire continent learned that the main instigator of Shualao City's rebellion was not the demon commander, nor was it Black Robe. It was that young demon lord that all the factions pitted or ignored. He was the real usurper. The demon commander and Black Robe had joined forces to push the once tyrannical demon lord into the abyss precisely because of his existence. The demon commander and Black Robe truly did not trust each other, but they both trusted the young demon lord and treated him as their closest nephew. Just how had the young demon lord managed to obtain the trust and loyalty of these two? His father had once been the most terrifying shadow on the continent. Even if Taizong and Zhou Dufu worked together, they would not be able to completely exterminate him. But he had personally killed him. Just what sort of existence was the young demon lord? To place his hopes of success on a true opponent, to use an opponent that was unimaginably terrifying, Han Qing had completely failed. On the verge of death, even he, who had guarded the mausoleum of books for 600 years and could not be moved by wind and rain, could not help but raise his head and look at the throne. It was a young and handsome demon. The corners of his lips were slightly raised, perfectly diluting the noble and domineering aura of his demon body. The young demon was the youngest son of the mighty demon lord. He was not much older than Nank. The deceased demon lord had many children. Han Qing was the strongest of them. Nank was the most famous, and the names of the others were very difficult to remember. In comparison, his name was rather well known, as he had once been the young master of the demon lord. More importantly, it was because he had once said a few words. "I very much want Su Yurong." It was not that he wanted to see her, but that he wanted her. When these words spread through the continent, they naturally incited the boundless fury of the humans and demi-humans, as well as much mockery. Because at the time, he had nothing more to boast about besides his status as the young master of the demon lord. Whether it was his talent in cultivation or the advancement of his demon body, his performance was very ordinary. He was inferior to Nank, much less Su Yurong. In the gatherings of the nobles of Shualao City and the Lanchi art exhibition, he had never received any praise. He was not even as good as Chun Changsheng, much less Qiu Shanjun. Until now, outside Shualao City, the flames of war were everywhere. Within the city, the heads of countless nobles had been severed and their bodies mutilated, their blood flowing to the heavens. Outside the demon palace, wolf cavalry howled through the air. The buildings of the palace were covered in scars of bitter battle. His legendary elder brother was kneeling in front of him, his body covered in blood. The demon commander in Black Robe quietly stood at his side. He was at the very front. He was at the very center. Do you really believe that you can always have their loyalty? Han Qing asked the young demon lord. He was naturally speaking of Black Robe and the demon commander. Big brother, all of you have lived for too long. When you think of things, you can only think of loyalty, hot-bloodedness, trust, schemes, these boring old words. I'm still very young, so I like some more refreshing new words like ideals, dreams, sunshine, warmth, spring, the south, and girls. A moving smile appeared on the young demon lord's face. Their support has nothing to do with loyalty, but because we share a common ideal, a dream. Han Qing understood what he meant, and his face paled. The 7th demon general and the 24th demon general stepped forward and dragged him out of the palace. The abyss behind the demon palace was waiting for him. The demon army was about to set out. The young demon lord walked out of the hall. As he gazed at the dense mass of wolf cavalry and the roaring demon soldiers, he suddenly fell silent. He seemed to be thinking of something, and his mind wandered. After a long time, he came to his senses and gave a self-deprecating chuckle. Then, he said something that would become famous in the future. The sunshine in the south is better, warmer, and the spring is longer. The south also has many girls, so let's go south. Chapter 742. Tianliang County was the most famous county on the continent. 1,000 years ago, this county had the Liang estate, the Chun clan, the Zhu clan, and the long-since declined Wang clan. Two imperial dynasties of the continent had begun here, and countless legendary figures had emerged without end, like those emperors like Chen Xuanba, like Zhu Luo, like the current Wang Pe. With the establishment of the Great Zhou dynasty, Tianliang County had an even more special status. It was viewed as the ancestral land, and whether in terms of taxation or civil administration, it enjoyed the best treatment. The Taoist church in Xianyang City also had the highest status of all the Taoist churches in the Orthodoxy. Its territory also expanded year by year, gradually becoming the largest county on the continent. On the map, the current Tianliang County was like a dagger. Hanqiu City was the hilt, Xianyang City was the edge, and above it was a vast expanse of land like the body of the sword. This sword pierced straight to the north, where the lush, snowy plains lay, the territory of the demons. Of course, the northernmost 1,000-some li of Tianliang County, other than the Tinsum strongholds and the two army headquarters, was desolate and desolate. The humans had never been able to establish an effective control over this place, much less make it flourish, because this place was too close to the demons. No matter what the situation in the world was, in the north of Tianliang County, the war between the humans and the demons had never truly stopped for a single day. Early last spring, after the demon army had invaded south, the situation here had become even more tense and bloody. The normally desolate and uninhabited plains were now covered in dust and dust. Incalculable numbers of cavalry were charging at each other. Even in the capital, it was extremely rare to see flying carriages and the vicious and strange beasts controlled by the demons. They faced each other in the cold sky, like the callous and emotionless eyes of a god. Amidst the heaven-shaking battle cries, the cavalry of both sides collided like a flood, countless blossoms of blood and countless waves of qi. In a very short period of time, countless human cavalry had fallen and died. At the same time, many of the most terrifying wolf cavalry of the demon race had been trapped by the human array and then torn into disgusting chunks of flesh. Just like their standpoints, the blood of the human clan and the demon clan was completely different in color, which contrasted sharply against the white snowfield. However, as more and more lives died, the red and green blood couldn't help fusing together, and the corpses were also piled up. No matter how magnificent or ugly they were, they could never be separated. Since the dead could not be separated, those who were still alive were naturally squeezed together. The armies of the two sides could no longer be distinguished from each other, turning into a black tide that completely enveloped the vast snowy plains. In such a high-density and intense battlefield, the arrays of both the human race and the demon race were forcefully torn apart by the bloody qi. Occasionally, the pained cries of array masters who suffered from the backlash before their deaths could be heard. Occasionally, cultivators or experts of the demon race would soar into the sky, killing their way through the battlefield like a black tide, intending to flee. In the next moment, they would be annihilated by the black tide, never to be seen again. One could see the occasional flash of light within the black tide. This was the bursting of star radiance. Each ray of light signified the death of a star condensation cultivator, the bursting of star radiance. Even if Xue Xingchuan came back to life, Xiao Zhang personally came, or those mountainous demon generals in the depths of the snowy plains acted, they would not have much meaning on this battlefield. This was war, bitter but extremely fair. The final outcome depended on every single person participating in the battle. Of course, only when every single person was together would they have any meaning to this battle. Once they were separated, their meaning would decrease until it became meaningless. For example, the squad of the Mount Song army that was traversing the disorderly mountains on the eastern side of the snowy plains was on the verge of complete annihilation, but it would not have any effect on this battle. The problem was that everyone in the squad wanted to live. Their lives and deaths were very meaningful to them, so they still wanted to continue fighting, even if they were clearly no match for the enemy. This squad of the Mount Song army had left the battlefield not because they were deserters out of fear, but because they had received orders to evacuate ahead of time with a heavily injured array master. Array masters were the most important characters on the battlefield. Laying down an array required one's sea of consciousness, star radiance, and the array to form an inseparable brand. This placed a very high demand on cultivators, so even the most ordinary array master had to be at ethereal opening. And when the array was broken, the array master would suffer an extremely bitter backlash. So array masters were also the characters that were the most likely to die on the battlefield. Most importantly, they were also the most likely to die. It was only natural that array masters were the people that all soldiers respected the most, and also the ones that they protected the most. In order to allow the heavily injured array master to be treated as quickly as possible, the squad of the Mount Song army had paid an extremely heavy price. By the time they arrived in these disorderly mountains, only 14 of their 30 soldiers remained, the 5 wolf cavalry pursuing them. Rubble flew into the air, the ground quaked, and the dust stirred. The figures of the wolf cavalry once more appeared before their eyes. The wolf cavalry was the most terrifying type of soldier of the demon race. Their mounts were a kind of bloodthirsty wolf found in the snowy plains. Its fur was like steel needles, its body's massive, it was incredibly fast, and it had a savage nature. Accompanied by a shower of rubble, 5 wolf cavalry burst out of the dust, surrounding the 14 human soldiers. These bloodthirsty wolves were around a zhang tall, and the demon soldiers riding them had horns on their heads. Their bodies were covered in scales, their eyes suffused with a gloomy green, and their mouths, which were shaped like a chevron, dripped with stinking saliva. Compared to the demon nobles of Xiulao City, these demon soldiers were particularly ugly and even more frightening. This was the true appearance of the low-level demons, and it was also the appearance of the demons in the eyes of the humans. Even the lowest level of demon soldiers could withstand a human who had undergone purification, not to mention these were the most elite wolf cavalry. Surrounded by 5 wolf cavalry, there was no way out. The faces of the human soldiers were brimming with despair, but none of them surrendered. Instead, they tightened their grips on their weapons. In a war between humans and demons, there were very few captives and very few surrenders. The reason was very simple. The demons did not have a habit of accepting surrenders. From a certain perspective, the innately brutal nature of the demons was beneficial to the human race, because they only had to worry about deserters, not traitors. It was precisely for this reason that many people had found it impossible to believe that the Mount Li Sword sect's Liang Xiao would collude with the demons. The battle began, and the victor was quickly decided. Although the Mount Song army unit could be said to have perfectly displayed the results of their arduous training, their coordination between offense and defense excellent, they were still unable to stop their foes. The furious waves of qi were suffused with the stench of blood, and countless wolf claw marks could be seen on the hard rock. The first clash only lasted for a few seconds before 3 more human soldiers were killed. The price the demon soldiers paid was the horn of one of their soldiers being cut off. The cold wind stirred up the dry snow, once more covering the wolf claw marks. The demon soldier whose horn had been cut off was furious. With a furious roar, he used his spear to raise the corpse of a human soldier in front of him. With a rip, the human soldier's corpse was torn in 2. Blood rained down. The demon soldier grabbed the upper half of the corpse, brought it to his mouth, and began to slowly chew on it. The lower half of the soldier's corpse also did not fall to the ground. It was bitten by the bloodthirsty wolf beneath the demon soldier. Kaka-kaka! In the deathly stillness of the valley, only the sound of bone being crushed could be heard. Blood dripped from the demon soldier's mouth, and also from the bloodthirsty wolf's mouth, falling to the ground. Chapter 743. The war between the humans and demons had begun over this continent, but the reason the two sides had fought to the death was closely related to one thing. The demons ate humans. This was the greatest fear and fury of the human race, and also the source of their greatest courage. In truth, no matter the era, the human race had never been the primary source of food for the demon race. At the very beginning, the demon race ate humans as a vestige of the desolate era, for the sake of mysterious battles, strengthening one's self, flaunting one's strength, and intimidating one's enemies. But as time passed, this sort of behavior became a habit of the demon race. Later on, this sort of terrifying behavior no longer had the same motivating effect on the demon race as it had at the very beginning, and its intimidating effect on the humans had mostly transformed into hatred and courage. From any angle, this sort of behavior had no benefit to the war between the humans and the demon race, only negative effects. The knowledgeable members of the demon race had realized this very early on. But if one wanted to break this established tradition, one would assuredly encounter many obstacles. Moreover, to the demon race, famed for their cruelty, any bloody and terrifying matter was their most welcomed mental enjoyment. Many years ago, that grand scholar Tungus, whose name had been passed down through the ages, used 20 years of research to finally determine the pros and cons of this behavior in terms of theology, the origin of customs, physiology, and psychology. In his work, the grand scholar had clearly stated that eating humans was of no benefit to the demon's advancement. On the contrary, a certain substance in the human body would infect the gray matter of the demon's brains, ultimately causing the demons who ate too many humans to go crazy and mutilate themselves to death. At the same time, Grand Scholar Tungus had expressed callous disdain for this sort of behavior in terms of theology, concluding that this sort of behavior was blasphemy against the moon god. In Shualao City, Grand Scholar Tungus's research naturally did not receive a single voice of opposition, just like any of his research in the past. And the only other grand scholar of that era who had the right to question him, the Pope of the South, had also ultimately maintained his silence. Perhaps it was precisely because this silence was too different from the intense disputes between the two of them in the past that many private discussions began to circulate. Some demon scholars suspected that there was something wrong with Grand Scholar Tungus's theory, while the scholars of the Li Palace secretly proposed an outrageous possibility. That book on the topic of the demon race eating humans was highly likely written by Grand Scholar Tungus and the Pope together. At the very least, the Pope had provided a great deal of assistance. If these suspicions were true, then there was naturally something wrong with this matter, and it was very likely that it was all fabricated. But just as was said before, this was Grand Scholar Tungus's judgment. The imperial clan and nobles of Shualao City maintained their silence, and the Pope in the Li Palace also maintained his silence. So who would dare to question them? Following the dissemination of this book, the practice of cannibalism in the demon race gradually weakened until 1,000 years ago, when the demon king, who had dominated the continent, finally took advantage of the situation and issued a ban. From that point on, cannibalism was completely forbidden in the land of demons, especially in Shualao City. It basically never appeared again. But the power of tradition was far too frightening, the snowy plains of the demon realm far too vast, and the difference in intelligence and level of civilization between the various levels of the demon race was far too great. Even mighty existences like Grand Scholar Tungus and the Demon Lord could not make this behavior completely disappear. The inferior demons in the small tribes were still secretly eating human flesh, and they were even proud of it. How many human corpses had disappeared on the battlefield for hundreds of years? Among the dozens of demon generals, how many had not tasted human flesh? Now, with the death of the Demon Lord and the increasing bitterness of the war between the demon race and the human race, the restraining power of this ban was severely weakened. In this remote area of the snowy plains, cruel scenes like this could be seen everywhere, such as this disorderly mountain. The demon soldier and the bloodthirsty wolf were constantly tearing at the corpses of the human soldiers. Blood dripped from the corners of their mouths and fell on the hard and cold ground. At this sight, someone finally could endure no longer. With a sorrowful howl, he threw away the weapon in his hand and ran to the back of the mountain path. But before he could get very far, a wolf cavalryman guarding the southwest side caught up to him. With a short scream, he was reduced to a pile of mangled flesh on the ground. On the battlefield, the human race received this sort of bloody lesson every day. Only by fighting with their comrades did they have any hope of survival. Any form of betrayal or flight would only lead to death. Fear and anger had always been twins. When that soldier ran away in panic, the other 10 soldiers became incomparably angry. Fury was the greatest source of courage. The soldiers once more tightly gripped their weapons and roared at the 5 wolf cavalry. The captain of this squad from the Mount Song army was a veteran who had undergone purification many years ago. He was very experienced in battle, so he was much calmer than his subordinates. As the screams and furious roars rose up one after another, he was still observing the surrounding terrain, judging the current situation, and thinking of a way to escape. His gaze fell on the stretcher, and he silently apologized. His squad was certain to be completely wiped out, so he would have to use his final 2 methods. But even if he succeeded, not a single person would be left alive. When the time came, the array master on the stretcher would freeze to death, or even starve to death. It would be a very wretched fate. Array masters were the most respected and welcomed people on the battlefield. Dying in battle was fine, but they should not meet such a miserable end. Moreover, this array master was very young. The minimum requirement to become an array master was ethereal opening, so generally speaking, they were rather old. The array master lying on the stretcher was very dark and thin, his face covered in blood and grime, but one could still tell that he was young from his appearance. Such a young array master was extremely rare even in the headquarters of the Mount Song army, let alone an ordinary army like theirs. Such a young array master was assuredly extremely talented. As long as he could survive, he would assuredly have an infinitely beautiful future ahead of him. The captain understood that it was precisely because of this that his superior had ordered them to escort this array master away in the midst of such an intense battle. Regretfully, the wolf cavalry that had been fighting with them at the time had probably also realized this, so they had not hesitated to sacrifice their fighting strength to send several wolf cavalry in pursuit. Seeing the approaching wolf cavalry, seeing his subordinates filled with the resolve to die, the captain threw away the sword in his hand and took a magical artifact from his waist. This magical artifact exuded a faint chi, resonating with some object in his body through his armor and clothes. The soldiers also seemed to sense something and turned to look at him. He opened his mouth, wanting to say something. The soldiers guessed at what he was preparing to do, and their faces paled. A young soldier's eyes reddened, not from anger, but from sorrow. There was no time to persuade, no time to comfort. The demon wolf cavalry had already charged over, their stench assailing his nostrils. Furious roars rose from the disorderly mountains. The human soldiers launched a counterattack against the wolf cavalry. No matter how sharp the teeth of the mutated wolves were, no matter how powerful the spears of the demon soldiers were, they charged. During this process, not a single person turned a glance at him. Blood spurted and limbs flew. In an extremely short amount of time, the human soldiers were all dead, while only 2 of the demon wolf cavalry had suffered light injuries. The corpses of the soldiers fell under the claws of the wolf cavalry, hung under the spears of the demon soldiers, and bitten in their mouths. The scene was abnormally bloody and terrifying. Looking at the last human, the devil soldier let out an unpleasant laugh. He could not understand what they were saying, so he crushed the magical artifact in his hand. Chapter 744. As the magical artifact shattered, a stream of chi emerged from the captain's hand and rapidly spread across the cliff. The corpses of the human soldiers that had already died were either on the ground, on the spears of the demon soldiers, or in the mouths of the strange wolves. As this stream of chi arrived, a similar but relatively weak chi began to emerge from within the corpses. This chi was like an invisible flame that had ignited a long-hidden fire seed. The demon soldiers vaguely sensed something, a hint of fear appearing in their dark green eyes. With sharp screams, they waved their spears and threw the corpses of the human soldiers into the distance. At the same time, they pulled on the leather rope around the strange wolves' necks, preparing to turn and flee. But it was too late. The bloodthirsty mutant wolf's intelligence was very low. It didn't know what had happened at all. It was somewhat reluctant to throw away the human corpse in its mouth. At this moment, a bright yellow ball of light seeped out of the human corpse. At the same time, even more bright yellow balls of light lit up the cliffs. Boom, 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 boom. Terrifying explosions resounded through the disorderly mountains, like thunder descending. Then, flames appeared. In an extremely short period of time, this place was transformed into a sea of fire. The hard stones were blown to smithereens and then melted into lava by the blazing flames, falling onto the bodies of the demon soldiers. The strange wolves suffered an even more wretched fate. Half of their heads had been blown to pieces, their flesh and blood so mangled that it was impossible to make out their original appearance. Wretched howls constantly resounded through the disorderly mountains, but they were unable to pass through the terrifying sea of fire and surging waves of chi and quickly vanished. Just like that, the demon soldiers and the strange wolves were killed. Those surging waves of chi pushed the cliff into a flat slope and then mixed into the world. Only that terrifying sea of fire lasted for a very long time before it slowly began to die down. The captain loosened the small scorched shield on his forearm and struggled to crawl backwards. His right arm had already been completely shattered by the explosive power of the magical artifact, and his abdomen was so mangled that his bones were faintly visible. He had suffered extremely heavy injuries, but he was still not dead. Before he died, there was one thing he had to accomplish, and that was to kill that array master. He respected this young array master very much. If the other could survive, he would definitely have an extremely bright future. Such an outstanding human should not be frozen to death or starved to death. Moreover, on the battlefield the day before yesterday, he had received a military order. He absolutely could not let this young array master fall into the hands of the demons. If necessary, he could kill this person. He crawled over to the stretcher with some difficulty and took 2 tired breaths. Looking at the young array master on the stretcher, his emotions were somewhat complicated and somewhat sentimental. The magic tool he used to kill the 5 demon soldiers was obviously not an ordinary magic tool, but an extremely strange magic tool, more like a formation. This kind of magic tool with the power of a formation was very rare, and the method of using it was exceedingly cruel. The Great Zhou army had basically never used it. This set of magical artifacts supposedly came from the Wenshui Tangs. He was able to possess this magical artifact because he was a trusted subordinate of the general, and also because he led this squad of the Mount Song Army headquarters on very important missions, like protecting or killing this young array master. Even when the soldiers under his command died, they had no idea that their bodies had been implanted with this sort of magical artifact. When he thought of the general's order before he went to the battlefield, his expression became somewhat perplexed. For the sake of this person, the important figures of the Mount Song Army headquarters had clearly made many arrangements in advance, even prepared to have the entire squad be buried. "Just who are you?" he muttered to himself as he gazed at the unconscious array master on the stretcher. Before killing this person, he very much wanted to know his name and background. Perhaps this would give him some comfort. Regretfully, this person had suffered a backlash on the battlefield and was severely injured. It was impossible for him to wake up and answer his questions. With some difficulty, he pulled out a dagger and aimed it at the young array master's throat. He closed his eyes, took in a deep breath, and then pressed down. But in the next moment, he did not hear the sound of the throat breaking, did not feel the dagger sink into flesh. He opened his eyes and was shocked to see that the dagger was caught between 2 fingers, unable to move down. What truly shocked him was that these 2 fingers belonged to the young array master. At some point, the young array master had woken up. His eyes were wide open as he calmly gazed at the captain. His eyes were very cold and devoid of emotion, just like the ice and snow left behind in the disorderly mountains. However, beneath the ice and snow, there were faint traces of blood that exuded a faint stench. The captain came to his senses and looked into the young array master's eyes, feeling an inexplicable fear. The young array master's fingers moved and took the dagger, but he did nothing else. The captain hurriedly explained what had just happened. The young array master seemed pensive. The captain had no more strength left. Exhausted, he sat on the ground and rejoiced. "You're still alive, so the deaths of us brothers aren't unjust." The young array master's voice was particularly cold. "Do you really think that trash like you can decide whether I live or die? I just don't want to act." "What?" The captain froze, not daring to believe what he had heard. What did this mean? After a few moments of shock and bewilderment, he grew angry. He pointed at the scorched corpse on the cliff, wanting to reprimand the other party. The young array master did not give him the chance. A terrifying chi emerged from those cold and cruel eyes, jolting him to death and turning him into a blood-soaked corpse. Then his corpse began to be burned by the flames of the magical artifacts left on the cliff, giving off an unpleasant smell. "Whether it was out of kindness or to complete a military order, you tried to kill me just now." The young array master looked at the burning corpse and indifferently said, "So you had to die." The cold wind howled, gradually extinguishing the remaining flames on the cliff and dispersing the complex and unpleasant smell. The demon soldiers and bloodthirsty wolves had suffered the most concentrated attacks from tinsome magical artifacts and had been burned by the array fire. Right now, only their rough outlines could be seen, and it was impossible to make out their appearances. The tinsome human soldiers were not much better off. In short, the scene was very dismal, the environment very cruel. But the young array master did not leave. He once more laid down on the stretcher. He closed his eyes. It was like he could not see the hellish cliff, could not smell the burning, could not feel the biting cold of the wind, and just fell into a deep sleep. This chapter is 1900 to pay back a portion of the debt from last time. Chapter 745. On the fourth day after the conclusion of the battle, the air in the Mount Song Army headquarters was still bitterly cold, but the stench of blood was much fainter. The streets were no longer filled with the tense sight of several hundred soldiers carrying stretchers, shouting as they ran, nor was the sacred sight of tinsome sacred lights simultaneously illuminating the night sky from the sacred hospital. Many plumes of white smoke rose from the whiling outside Mount Song, drifting high into the sky. The people in the city who saw this sight from afar stopped and mourned, because each plume of white smoke represented a fallen soldier. According to a preliminary count, the number of soldiers of the Great Zhou who had sacrificed themselves in this battle exceeded 10,000, and this did not even include the laborers in charge of logistics and the cultivators who had come to reinforce the army. The mood in the sacred hospital was no longer as tense as it had been a few days ago. The majority of the injured had been brought under control, and those who were too heavily injured to be treated had long since been carried out. However, for some reason, the room in the deepest part of the hospital was still packed with people, and the mood was exceptionally anxious. "I don't want to hear any explanation. I only want you to save him." The general's face was extremely grim and his tone unyielding. When his gaze fell on the bed, his voice became even more ruthless. The injured person lying on the bed was very young. From his clothes and the cloth bag at his waist, one could tell that he was an array master. He was thin and his limbs were a little black, but his face was as white as paper. It was clear that he had lost too much blood, and his lips were curled up in dried skin. His breathing was extremely weak, and he seemed like he could die at any moment. The general's words caused the people in the room to feel an enormous pressure, and at the same time, they were rather confused. Such a young array master had assuredly come from a famous sect and had an extremely promising future, but the general was a trusted aide of divine General Ku and had an extremely high reputation and status in the Mount Song Army headquarters. Why would he be so angry over a wounded person? It had to be known that besides the military doctor, there were also two people from the orthodoxy who had treated this young array master. The general knew what they were thinking. but he gave no explanation. He had a vague idea of this young array master's background, but this was not the reason he was so angry and nervous. Before arriving at the hospital, he had just received the dossier of the investigation. Other than the young array master on the bed who was about to die, no one knew what had happened between the cliffs. But the soldiers who had seen that cliff with their own eyes were all very sure that it had been an extremely heroic affair, because the scene they had seen was extremely bitter. Some soldiers had used the magical artifacts of the 128 Tang clan to self-destruct, taking 5 wolf cavalry down with them. And on the path of retreat in front of the cliff, they had discovered the corpses of some soldiers. 30 of the bravest and most elite soldiers of the Mount Song army had sacrificed themselves precisely so that this young array master could survive. Therefore, he had to keep this young array master alive. Otherwise, how could he comfort the souls of his dead subordinates? I won't explain anything, because I really don't have the ability to keep him alive. A woman dressed in white rose from the bed. Her beautiful face was filled with exhaustion, and the gentle, holy light gradually dissipated from her slender fingers. The general fell silent. The woman came from the capital's 13 divisions of Radiant Green. Her surname was Ahua. 2 days ago, she had arrived at the Mount Song Army headquarters and then began to work tirelessly to treat the wounded on the battlefield. If not for the fact that the Mount Song Army headquarters had stockpiled enough crystals to help one meditate and recover, she might have already died from the exhaustion of her sacred light. Facing her, no matter how terrible and anxious the general's mood was, he could not say any harsh words. And he could clearly see that she had done all she could to save the young array master on the bed. The general turned to the cleric in charge of the sacred hospital. The cleric imperceptibly shook his head. If the doctors of the various hospitals were powerless to treat the young array master's injuries, could the sacred light technique of the cleric of the Lee Palace and the teachers of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green not save him? The general's mood sank to the bottom. Unable to control his emotions, he slammed his fist against the table. The mood in the room was abnormally gloomy. Some people took off their hats, preparing to offer their condolences. At this moment, a doctor in the corner sadly said, "If only there were more cinnabar pills." The name, cinnabar pill, seemed to possess some sort of magical power. The room was quiet, almost deathly still, with only the sound of ragged and hurried breathing. Delight appeared in some people's eyes, but they quickly dimmed as they thought of something. Just as expected, the cleric sighed. On the first day of the campaign, our quota was used up. The general was well aware of how many heavily wounded soldiers had been sent back for the battlefield on the first day. From the very start, he had not held any hope, but when that name was once more mentioned, he couldn't help but cling to one last hope and ask, when will the next batch be distributed? Will he be able to last until that day? The cleric shook his head. The date for the medicine is 10 days from now. With his injuries, he can last for 5 more days at most. And Hua had been studying the sacred light technique in the 13 divisions of Radiant Green this entire time. And after the war with the demons began, she had placed all her attention on cultivation. She wanted to go to the front lines as quickly as possible to treat the wounded, so she paid no attention to the outside world. Coupled with the fact that she had only been at the Mount Song Army headquarters for 2 days, she had no idea what everyone was talking about. "What is the cinnabar pill? A pill?" she asked the cleric in confusion. Based on its name, the primary ingredient for this pill was cinnabar, which truly could be used as medicine to staunch bleeding. However, this young array master's injuries were so severe that not even her sacred light technique was effective. In her view, only several cardinals working together could save him. Could this pill have the same effect? The cleric understood what she was thinking and said, "The cinnabar pill can cure this person's injuries." Everyone nodded, none of them expressing any doubt. This was because in the hearts of those who had seen the cinnabar pill, this pill could cure all wounds and illnesses in the world. And Hua had never heard of this pill before, so she could not understand their fervent faith in it, which made her even more confused. "If it really works, why don't we hurry and try it?" The cleric sighed. "Where can we find such a treasure?" The crowd recalled the rumor that this pill could only be found in the heavens and fell silent. The general said to Enhua, "This pill is very rare." Enhua was still confused. If this pill really does have a miraculous effect, why not have the Yao clan offer up the recipe and then have the imperial court or the Li palace mass produce it? The room fell silent once more. Everyone's gazes fell on her, and they all seemed rather nervous. No one answered her question. The entire sacred hospital suddenly fell silent. There was not a single sound. It was like her question was some sort of taboo. Chapter 746. The sacred hospital was quiet. In the innermost room, one could even hear the breathing of the people inside, and it was even possible to hear that some people were deliberately suppressing their breathing. Some people lowered their heads, while others nervously looked around. The atmosphere was oppressive and tense, as if someone was spying on them. In this tense atmosphere, someone suddenly couldn't help but cough. The general glanced at him and continued to ask, 10 more days? These words caused the mood in the room to lighten a little. And Hua followed the cleric to the window and whispered, "Just what is going on here?" The cleric replied, "No one can make the Yao clan hand over the recipe because even now, no one knows just who made this pill." And Hua was shocked by this answer. Forgetting the strange mood in the room, she raised her voice and asked, "How could this be possible?" Since this pill existed in the world and had already been used, someone had naturally sent it to the various army headquarters. How could it be impossible to find out just who made it? The cleric raised his right hand, indicating that she should pay attention to her emotions, but he did not give any explanation. Even if we don't know the origins of this pill, what about imitating it? Even without the recipe, we can deduce it from the composition of the pill. Anhua saw the cleric's somewhat hesitant expression and thought that she had guessed at what he was worried about. She advised, "This is saving the dying and healing the injured, not doing business." The lives of the soldiers on the front lines are countless times more important than those stale notions of morality. I believe that both the archbishops and your holiness should be well aware of this point. The cleric shook his head. "You don't understand. This matter is very complicated, and this pill is also very complicated. It's very difficult to imitate. From a name, one can roughly guess that this pill probably uses cinnabar as the primary ingredient, supplemented by other medicines. If it really is so miraculous, the important part is definitely in the supplementary ingredients." And Hua stared into the cleric's eyes and said, "But please do not tell me just how rare and precious those supplementary ingredients are, because that will not convince me." There were no ingredients in the world that the orthodoxy and the imperial court could not find, but this was not enough to make the cleric speechless. He bitterly smiled and said, "Let alone finding those supplementary ingredients. Even up until now, no one has been able to figure out just how many supplementary ingredients this pill has." And Hua was once more stunned, thinking, given the abilities of so many priests and scholars of the orthodoxy and imperial court, how could they not have figured out the composition and proportions of these supplementary medicines? The cleric lowered his voice and said, "The number of pills available for research is too small, and the person who provided the pills has already stated in advance that this is forbidden." And Hua became even more interested when she heard that there was such a thing. She asked, "Just what is the origin of this pill?" Like I said before, no one knows where it came from. People only know that a bottle of medicinal pills appeared in Blue Pass a year ago. The priest's eyes suddenly became bright, as if they were glowing. However, it wasn't greed or possessiveness, but yearning and reverence. There were 20 pills in the bottle that appeared in Blue Pass. Perhaps it was an emergency, or perhaps the mysterious alchemist had made some arrangements in advance. In short, a soldier who was on the verge of death took a pill and survived. This sort of thing continued to happen. No matter how heavily injured they were, as long as they did not die on the spot, they would be able to survive after taking this pill. Although it was not always possible to completely recover from the injuries of the wounded, with some cultivators having their ethereal palaces damaged or several meridians unable to be healed, they at least managed to escape the shadow of death. Everyone who had personally witnessed this scene of the pill saving a person, exclaiming in shock that this was a miracle. This miracle naturally spread extremely quickly. In a very short amount of time, This mysterious pill became the most famous item in the Tinsum Army headquarters of the Snowy Plains. At some point, people suddenly learned that this pill was called the Cinnabar pill, but they still didn't know where it had come from or who had made it. Cure the dead, grow the bones of the dead. These were two phrases that Hua had seen in the Taoist canon. She naturally knew that this was an exaggerated description that could not possibly be real. But the reactions of the people in the sacred hospital and the bright eyes of the cleric told her that this was a real existence and that it had already been seen by someone. How could such a thing happen? Even if the Li Palace really did hide some legendary holy medicine, it would probably be nothing more than this. Moreover, the number of holy medicines was assuredly very small, so they were completely meaningless to this war. She suddenly asked, "How many Cinnabar pills are there in total?" The cleric replied, "No one knows." Upon hearing this answer again, Ahua suddenly felt very tired. But this time, it had nothing to do with mysticism, only a simple mathematical problem. Every month, a bottle of Cinnabar pills will appear, so no one knows just how many pills that person has in their hands. The cleric looked into her eyes and said, "I am more inclined to believe that the Cinnabar pill was refined by that person and is currently being refined." And Hua was stunned once more, her voice slightly tense as she said, "I also hope that it's the latter. If it was the latter, then it meant that the Cinnabar pill could be continuously supplied to the soldiers on the front lines, and it was even possible that it would gradually increase." From every angle, this was the most ideal situation. Of course, this was based on the premise that the Cinnabar pill really was that mystical. And Hua looked at the cleric, her eyes shining with hope, almost pleading. The cleric knew what she was feeling and what she wanted to hear, because he had also experienced a similar moment. Even now, he could not forget that nervousness and hope. He looked at her and calmly and firmly said, "Yes, the Cinnabar pill really can save your life, no matter how heavily injured you are." And Hua's hands were somewhat trembling, not because of nervousness, but because of joy and confusion. She was a member of the clergy and also a doctor. She was deeply compassionate and benevolent, and what she most often considered was how to save the dying and heal the wounded. She was well aware that this signified that for the first time in human history, a sacred medicine could be mass-produced. To her, this signified that many life-and-death separations would disappear, that all pain would vanish. Of course, to the human race, this sacred medicine also signified many other things. For instance, some important array masters and cultivators would have two lives. So what did this pill signify for the war between the humans and demons? Ahua did not think about these things. She was thinking, if this pill is not a gift from the divine kingdom to the human race, then what is it? No matter who that person is, they are destined to stand on the divine altar of history and receive the worship of all the people, right? This chapter had 1981 words, continuing from the chapter that had been updated at the starting point. Chapter 747. The conversation between Hua and the cleric by the window had not been loud, but the room was too quiet, so everyone could clearly hear it, and then they began to worry. If that person revealed their identity, they would assuredly obtain unimaginable benefits through this pill. This would not only mean wealth, but even more importantly, power. But it was obvious that this person had never had any such thoughts. Why? Was it to preserve their sense of mystery? Or was it for safety? And Hua still did not understand why neither the imperial court nor the orthodoxy had been able to find out who that person was. Could it be that this medicine called the Cinnabar pill was a drop of jade nectar from the divine kingdom? It had to be known that since the pills would be delivered to the various army headquarters at regular intervals, they would assuredly leave behind many clues, such as who was responsible for delivering the pills. The one Shui Tangs. The cleric knew what she was thinking and explained, the people responsible for delivering and distributing the pills are all people from the Tang clan. The medical center was located on the widest and straightest street of the Mount Song Army headquarters. Across from it was an important location of the Army headquarters, and behind it was an inn on the Plum Path. This inn was the most famous and most luxurious inn in the town. Every day, people would come and go, But many people did not know that the most expensive suite of the inn was only separated by a single wall from the sacred hospital. A middle-aged man sat on a palace armchair, silent and rather gloomy. This did not represent his current mood, but because he had far too many matters to attend to that day. This person's clothes were very simple, but they were made of very good materials. His noble aura was hidden but not revealed. He was probably a merchant. The voice on the other side became extremely weak after passing through the wall. Even the best thief would find it difficult to hear. But this person had his head lowered and was listening very intently. He seemed to be able to hear every detail of the conversation. From these details, one could faintly see that this person had an extraordinary cultivation level and was highly likely to be a true expert. The conversation in the sacred hospital was still continuing. An elderly doctor said, "This is a matter that everyone on the front lines is very concerned about, so there have always been people secretly investigating. What we can now confirm is that the Wunshui Tangs are only responsible for delivering and distributing the pills, not the true master of the cinnabar pill. We even believe that the Wunshui Tangs don't know who that person is." This sounded rather unbelievable, but it was very likely the truth. And at the very start, everyone had been more concerned about how the Wunshui Tangs would distribute the pills. What was the most precious thing in the world? Of course, it was a life that could not be restarted. Medicines that could save lives were naturally treasures that everyone wanted to get their hands on. Having the power to distribute medicine was equivalent to having the power to control the life and death of many people. This kind of power was very scary, and at the same time, it was a very heavy responsibility. Handing over such authority to others from another perspective was actually shirking responsibility. It could also be said to be irresponsible. In Hua's view, the person who could refine the cinnabar pill assuredly had a benevolent heart that cherished the common people. They would definitely not do such a thing. That person did not hand over all the power to the Tang family. He has set up many rules in advance. The cleric smiled at her and said, "First of all, it is strictly forbidden to investigate his background, to ask where the name of the cinnabar pill came from, and to analyze the composition of the medicine." Only now did Hua understand why when she said that the orthodoxy and the imperial court should imitate each other, why the room had become so quiet, and why everyone had looked at her with such strange gazes. It turned out that this was a rule that had been set by that person in advance, or perhaps it could be said that this was a taboo of the cinnabar pill. So how should it be distributed? How to distribute the cinnabar pill among the Tinsum army headquarters was not a difficult matter. She was not skilled in this aspect, but she could roughly guess that the distribution method should be based on the number of soldiers in each army headquarters. This method was the simplest and fairest. The true difficulty lay in how to distribute the pills to the injured. The Mount Song Army Headquarters was one of the larger of the Tinsum Army Headquarters on the front lines. At most, they would only receive 6 pills each month, and at least 2 in the month when they received the least. And even in the month when the war was at its most stable, when there were no major battles, the number of people heavily injured or on the verge of death was at least 100. Those that the sacred light technique and the doctors can heal will not be given, no matter how serious their injuries are, even if they have lost a leg or an arm, as long as they're not dead, the elderly doctor explained. Whether the cinnabar pill is given or not has nothing to do with age, position, or background. First, it is given to the clergy, and second to the array masters. And Hua quickly understood why it was being distributed this way. The clergy on the front lines could more or less use the sacred light technique. So if one cinnabar pill could save one clergy, it meant that they could save even more people in the future. Array masters had the most important mission on the battlefield and endured the greatest pressure. Their death rate was extremely high, but they were also extremely respected, so it was acceptable for them to be ranked second. The clergy continued. What follows is the cultivation of the injured and the condition of their injuries. The higher the cultivation and the more serious the injury, the higher the order. And Hua was somewhat confused. Why was it that the higher the cultivation of a cultivator, the easier it was for them to obtain the cinnabar pill? The general expressionlessly explained, Because this is war. Saving an expert is more meaningful to the human race than saving an ordinary person. From a purely rational point of view, this sentence of course made sense. But wasn't all life equal? Regardless of position, clan background, or age, would there still be a difference in status? Anhua suddenly felt a little cold. A furious voice came from outside the door. This is not fair. Are the lives of ordinary people like us not lives? At some point, an injured soldier from the sacred hospital had appeared at the door. He had a crutch under his arm, and his trousers were floating in the wind. He had probably lost his leg on the battlefield. It was obvious that this wounded soldier's furious complaints had appeared more than once in the Mount Song Army headquarters and other places. No one paid attention to this wounded soldier. The room was very quiet, and even Anhua said nothing, only silently lowered her head. Reality was cruel. That person truly did appear very cold and detached when distributing the cinnabar pill, but no one could deny that it was correct. Anhua raised her head to the clergy and asked, "Then, who will determine the severity of the injuries?" It was obvious that this was the truly important problem and also the truly troublesome problem. This chapter was 1912, continuing to fill in the gaps from that day's repeated updates. Chapter 748. In Anhua's view, determining the severity of an injury was a rather important step, and it was only right that the Li Palace clerics, who were both trustworthy and capable, carry out this task. But in the face of her questioning gaze, the cleric shook his head, hesitating to speak, his emotions rather complex. Right now, the Tang clan steward and the accompanying medical officers are in charge of determining the severity of an injury. The elderly medical officer continued. That person had already drafted the rules for determining the severity of an injury. The specific rules were written very clearly, and every sacred hospital has a copy. Whether it's us or the steward of the Tang clan, we all have to follow these rules. No one dares to act recklessly. After saying this, he took out a booklet about half a finger thick from his sleeve and handed it to Anhua. Anhua took the booklet and began to flip through it. As she read more and more, the admiration in her eyes deepened. The cleric had naturally also seen the rules for determining the severity of an injury. He sighed. Even without the cinnabar pill, just by looking at these rules for determining the severity of an injury, one can ascertain that that person is a renowned doctor. After reading through the booklet, she returned it to the medical officer and then raised her final and most important question. How does that person guarantee that these rules will be effectively carried out? She had devoted herself to learning in the 13 divisions of Radiant Green and had never concerned herself with outside matters. But she knew that the hearts of men were sinister and that the ways of the world were complex. Moreover, even the most perfect of rules could find loopholes, and this was not even mentioning the fact that this matter involved life and death. There were so many cultivation experts and important figures in the army headquarters on the front lines, so who would care about such things in the heat of the moment? For example, if the grandson of some important figure of the imperial court was heavily injured on the battlefield, he would not have the right to receive the cinnabar pill. But if he was about to die, would anyone dare to not give him the pill? A situation like this truly did occur at Blue Pass. Divine General Fei, Diane's nephew, stole a cinnabar pill. The cleric glanced at the general and continued. Later on, Blue Pass was unable to obtain a single cinnabar pill for 2 whole months, causing the morale of the army to waver and the people to seethe with resentment. A mutiny occurred, and a squad that had suffered grievous casualties charged into the Divine General's estate and chopped the recuperating general into meat paste. Anhua uneasily asked, "This was open robbery, but what if a truly important figure had tampered with the distribution of the pill?" The cleric looked into her eyes and said, "You probably don't know, but the one responsible for distributing the cinnabar pills at the very beginning was not the Wenshui Tangs, but the Hall of Illustrious Persons." Anhua was somewhat shocked. "My lady is saying that the Orthodoxy was in charge of this matter at the very beginning? Then why was it transferred to the Tang family? Just as you said earlier, someone tried to tamper with the medicine before it was distributed." The cleric lamented. "That was a student from the temple seminary who had come to the front lines as reinforcements." This student was extremely talented in cultivation and was viewed as far superior to Tian Haiyu of the past. Moreover, his character was excellent, and he was extremely brave when killing enemies. In a sudden battle with the wolf cavalry, he was heavily injured in order to cover his fellow students' retreat. And Hua asked in confusion, "Is he still not worthy of a cinnabar pill? That's a very remote military fort. He only managed to get one cinnabar pill in 3 months, and his luck is very bad." "What do you mean?" "There's a rogue array master who's also heavily injured and on the verge of death. He's ranked in front of him." "I see." When the bishop of the temple seminary learned of this matter, he asked the cardinal of the Hall of Illustrious Persons to tamper with the distribution, writing his name in front of that rogue array master's. To the Li Palace, a talented and promising young student was naturally many times more important than a rogue cultivator without a sect or sect. And Hua would not do such a thing, but she could understand why the bishop of the temple seminary would do such a thing. After that temple seminary student took the cinnabar pill, he truly did recover, and there were no side effects left behind. And that rogue array master, dead. This was the inevitable fate of that array master. These two plain words made one feel a sense of desolation and helplessness. Ahua was quiet for a while, then asked, "And then?" Since it was the bishop of the temple seminary and the cardinal of the Hall of Illustrious Persons who had acted, whether it was a change in the order or some other insider transaction, they would not have left behind any evidence. She even thought of an even darker possibility. For example, some powerful figure might even secretly kill those injured who were ranked in front of them for the cinnabar pill. That military fort was not affected in the slightest. Just like in the past, it was given a cinnabar pill every 3 months. The cleric's tone suddenly turned solemn. But from then on, the Hall of Illustrious Persons was never able to obtain a single cinnabar pill. No one knows how that person came to know of this matter, nor did that person give any evidence. He only took back the authority to distribute the cinnabar pill from the Hall of Illustrious Persons and gave it to the Wenshui Tangs. The room was quiet. Everyone still remembered this major event from last year. The cleric sighed. Upon hearing of this matter, Archbishop Mao Qiuyu flew into a thunderous rage and requested Linghai Zhuang to begin cleaning up the Hall of Illustrious Persons. That cardinal was immediately executed. The bishop of the temple seminary was exiled from the orthodoxy, and many other important figures also met with great misfortune because of this matter. And Hua knew that an extremely experienced and authoritative cardinal had died in the Hall of Illustrious Persons. She had originally believed that he had died of illness, but she had not expected that it had originated from this matter. The situation between the imperial court and the orthodoxy was no longer as tense as it was 2 years ago, but the two sides were still in a standoff. On the front lines of the war with the demons, the imperial court's words naturally carried the most weight. In these circumstances, the orthodoxy had to treasure any opportunity to display its strength, let alone the authority to distribute the cinnabar pill. That cardinal and the bishop of the temple seminary had offended the master of the cinnabar pill, causing the orthodoxy to lose this extremely precious resource. Even 10,000 deaths could not atone for this crime. Mao Qiuyu was famed for his benevolence, but his subordinates had caused such a major incident, so his rage and harsh punishment were completely understandable. From that point on, no one dared to have any ideas about the cinnabar pill, and no one dared to fake injuries and then try to hide it. Incidents of stealing medicine also decreased. The cleric continued, because these were the rules set down by that person. Yes, no one knows who that person is. Perhaps he's just an ordinary doctor in the countryside who has no way to protect his own rules, but he has the cinnabar pill, so his words carry weight. The bloody incident in the Hall of Illustrious Persons has already proven this point, and the Wenshui Tangs, in order to maintain their right to distribute the medicine, are not afraid to kill someone for the sake of that person's rules. No matter where you hide, who can survive if the Tang clan wants to kill you? This chapter, 1992, continues to fill in the gaps from the repeated updates. Chapter 749. No matter how miraculous a medicine was, If it could not be used by one, it was no different from trash. To the young array master on his deathbed, the cinnabar pill was this sort of existence. The general no longer looked at him. He turned and walked out of the room, stopping as he passed Ahua and the cleric. After asking them to take good care of him, he sternly said a few words. I will not say that this person is fishing for fame, but this person is assuredly scheming something great. Everyone understood the general's meaning. Whether that person had found this divine recipe from an ancient text or had developed it through his talent in medicine, if he truly cared about the safety of the human race, bemoaned the state of the universe, and pitted the fate of mankind, then the most appropriate thing to do was to take out the recipe. Ever since she had confirmed that the cinnabar pill truly did have miraculous effects and had saved many people who should have been alive, Anhua had developed an extremely favorable impression of that mysterious person that no one had ever met. She was not willing to believe that this person was a schemer or had other motives, but she also could not refute the general's words. That person could only take out one bottle of cinnabar pills every month, and several dozen pills were still too few when compared to the needs of the soldiers on the front lines. She believed that this person was already doing his best, but because he could not gather enough rare ingredients, or because his abilities were limited, he could not increase the production. However, as long as he was willing to hand over the recipe, these problems could be easily resolved. Just as she had thought at the very beginning, no matter how rare the ingredients required for this pill were, the orthodoxy and the imperial court would assuredly be able to find them. If the orthodoxy and the imperial court could mass-produce this pill, the human race would obtain an enormous advantage in this war, and the future of the continent would be bright. Of course, to that person, this was also of great benefit. He would receive the gratitude of the entire world and countless merits. Even if he could not cultivate, he would still become a true saint. So why was he not willing to do this? The middle-aged man sat in his chair, quietly drinking tea. Then owner stood in front of him, not daring to move. Upon hearing the voices coming from behind the wall, a mocking smile appeared on his lips. Saint? It's just hoarding. The owner pressed his body even lower, not daring to say anything. Hoarding rare goods was a method used by merchants to sell their goods. How much was the cinnabar pill worth? In terms of curative effects, it could regrow bones and cure the dead. Naturally, it was a priceless treasure. But in reality, from the moment the cinnabar pill first appeared in Blue Pass, there had never been a price. If you wanted to obtain it, you didn't need any money. All you needed to do was wait, if you had the life to wait until then. Whether it was the master of the cinnabar pill, the Hall of Illustrious Persons, or the current Wenshui Tangs, none of them could obtain any profit from the cinnabar pill. In the view of some people, there was simply no reason for the Wenshui Tangs to offend so many factions and powerful figures for the sake of a pill that they could not obtain any profit from. However, in the eyes of truly knowledgeable people, this idea was undoubtedly extremely foolish. The master of the cinnabar pill had determined the rules, but the rules were dead, and there were always some places that could be used. For instance, if two array masters were both heavily injured and on the verge of death, whether it was in terms of cultivation or past military merit, they were all very similar. So how could they be determined in the order? At times like this, the Tang family was in control. Even if this kind of authority didn't appear all the time and seemed very insignificant, it was still as vast as the ocean. No matter how much one valued it, it wouldn't be too much. The Tang family would never give up on this resource. In order to ensure the long-term preservation of this resource, they would do their utmost to satisfy that person's conditions, including enforcing the rules for that person. After the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, the Tang family status in the human race had risen even higher, already leaving the Tianhai clan far behind and becoming the de facto #1 clan of the Great Zhou dynasty. Now that they held the right to distribute the cinnabar pill, their status had once more been solidified, even making many factions faintly fear them. A normal clan would have been perfectly satisfied with this position, but the Wenshui Tangs were no normal clan. They were the earliest merchants of the continent. Merchants could never be satisfied. They were insatiably greedy. Whether this was praise or criticism, Business was business, so the Tang family naturally could not be satisfied with the profits brought by the cinnabar pill. Compared to the miraculous effects of the cinnabar pill, the current profits were rather small, and they were not the leader. That mysterious person was the true owner, and the Tang family could not accept this. Whether it was armaments, provisions, cities, treasures, or medicines, the Tang family had to be the sole owner of any business on the continent, or at the very least, the major shareholder. Starting from tens of thousands of years ago, greed for profit and a valiant desire for control had been the strongest colors of the Shui Tangs, even the goal of their existence. These 2 points had long since been engraved into the blood of every member of the clan, becoming an obsession. Thus, even with the bloody incident of the Hall of Illustrious Persons, they still wanted to obtain even more from the cinnabar pill. More than anyone else, they wanted to know just who the true master of the cinnabar pill was. Compared to the other factions of the world, they were unquestionably the closest to that person. Perhaps there were several layers of fog between them, but they could already faintly see the truth. Yes, this was the property of the Shui Tangs. The middle-aged man was the 17th master of the Shui Tangs. He had come all the way from Shui to the Mount Song Army headquarters precisely to find a secret hidden behind the cinnabar pill. A respectful and fearful voice came from outside the door. The good from Black Mountain have arrived. The Tang's 17th master slightly arched his brows, his eyes brightening. He rose from his chair and, under the guidance of the innkeeper, arrived at a secret room in the rear courtyard of the inn. A large black stone table was placed in the center of the secret room. On the stone table was the goods that the Shui Tangs had paid an enormous price to transport from the Black Mountain Army headquarters. It was a corpse. The victim was a man. He was severely injured. His face and neck were charred black, which was obvious that he had been burned by the poisonous demonic flame. His half-unbuttoned clothes were obviously of military style. His fingers were long and slender, and his knuckles were slightly bulging. There were still faint traces of starlight in a miserable wound on his chest and abdomen that had not completely dissipated. From these details, one could see that this was a star condensation cultivator who had died in battle with demon experts. He was highly likely to be a general of the Great Zhou army. The Tang's 17th master took a pure white handkerchief from his sleeve and covered his nose and mouth, using his eyes to signal the innkeeper to step forward. The innkeeper walked up to the black stone table, took out a sharp knife, and began to cut at the chest and abdomen of the corpse, starting from the already existing wound. With a soft swish, the edge of the knife cut open the corpse's stomach. An unpleasant green liquid gushed out and dripped onto the table. The Tang's 17th master slightly frowned, somewhat disgusted as he tightened his grip on the handkerchief, but he did not shift his gaze. In front of him, the innkeeper had seemed like a particularly mediocre servant, but at this moment he seemed like an extremely experienced coroner. Without hesitation, the innkeeper extended his hand into the corpse's stomach. After searching for a while, he took out a small bag. This bag was made of some unknown material. It was neither leather nor paper, and its surface was very smooth. It felt extremely thin and soft, and one could faintly make out a round object within. This object could be a stone, could be a pearl. It could also be a pill. Chapter 750. A few days ago, I posted a few chapters of 1,900 characters. I always thought that this would give me 900 characters for free, but yesterday, after Dreammaker's reminder, I learned that the current method of charging has changed. It's no longer free for less than 1,000 characters, for example, 1,900 characters, but only free for a chapter of less than 1,000 characters. Then I want to directly post 2 chapters of 900 characters worth of free chapters in my acceptance speech. But I'm worried that I won't be able to see my acceptance speech on the QQ Reading app, so I better ask the Lord Editor how to do it. The small pouch was very slender. Presumably, when it was in the body of that expert of the Great Zhou army, the upper half was probably in the esophagus, and the opening was probably in the throat. There also seemed to be some sort of mechanism hidden above. The one Shui Tangs had even created the yellow paper umbrella, so they probably had a way to completely isolate anything from the outside world once it entered the pouch. The shopkeeper did not immediately begin. Instead, he very earnestly, even somewhat tediously, began to wash his hands. Only after confirming that his hands were as clean as new and then using 4 towels to wipe them clean without a single trace of moisture did he carefully untie the pouch and take out the item inside. It was a pill about the size of a pea and dark red, just like blood. Perhaps because it had been contaminated by the moisture in the corpse, there were some slight ulcerations on its surface. At this sight, a hint of heartache appeared in the shopkeeper's eyes, and the Tang's 17th master's face also turned gloomy. "It should be fine," the shopkeeper said in a trembling voice, then hurriedly placed the dark red pill into the basin that had been prepared beforehand. The basin was filled with wheat bran. Of course, it was no ordinary wheat bran. It had been filtered and dehumidified many times, so it was ivory white and very dry, devoid of any moisture. The shopkeeper scooped up the wheat bran and placed it over the pill, then used his hands to lightly rub it. His movements were exceptionally gentle, like he was caressing a lover. The pill lightly rolled around in the wheat bran. With the passage of time, it became completely clean, its dark red color becoming more and more distinct, even giving off a soul-stealing feeling. The Wunshui Tangs did not have a complete understanding of this pill. They only knew that it would melt upon contact with water and would be extremely difficult to preserve. At this point, the shopkeeper finally confirmed that there were no problems with this method of cleaning, and his gaze softened as he looked at the pill. Of course, it still could not compare to his gaze at the Tang, 17th master. He beamed with joy and said, "Lord 17th is extraordinarily intelligent. This method is indeed effective." The Tang's 17th master paid no attention to this person's flattery. He took a snow-white, brand-new handkerchief from his sleeve and placed it in his hand. He took the pill and earnestly examined it for a very long time, until his eyes began to blaze with passion. He suddenly sensed a change in his mood and slightly creased his brow. He sternly asked, "Is this pill really that mystical?" The shopkeeper did not notice the subtle change in his mood and said, "That is indeed the case. Otherwise, why would Lord 17th be troubled to personally make this trip?" He was trying to curry favor with this master, but when he said this, his gaze couldn't help but fall on the pill in the other party's palm, and then he licked his lips. This unconscious movement showed that he was a little nervous and also revealed the greed in his heart. The Tang's 17th master noticed this, and his lips perked up as he asked, "Do you know what this is?" The shopkeeper's expression flickered as he thought, "Isn't this the legendary cinnabar pill?" "This isn't a pill, nor is it wealth. It's power," the Tang's 17th master replied. "To be able to decide life and death is the greatest authority in the world." The shopkeeper praised, "17th master's words are extraordinary." The Tang's 17th master impassively said, "If some people covet this authority but do not have the strength to match it, then they are seeking death." The shopkeeper's body slightly stiffened and he lowered his head, no longer daring to glance at the pill. People entered the secret room one after another, surrounding the black stone table. These people included the guardian of the original pavilion of heavenly secrets, 2 of Fengyang County's most famous doctors, a cleric of unknown origins that the Tang clan had hired with a large sum of money, and a doctor who had taken the Tang old master's pulse in Wenshui. Regardless of their status, all of them had the same expression on their faces. It was an expression that seemed calm, but was actually extremely nervous and somewhat stiff. They were all looking at the red pill on the black table, not just once, but many times for a very long time. They were nervous because they knew the origins of this pill, so they naturally felt a greedy desire to seize it, but they knew that they absolutely could not do this. One of the doctors from Fengyang County, out of fear that he would not be able to resist this temptation, forcefully turned his head away. Look, smell, ask, and feel. These were the things that doctors needed to do when treating a patient. Although they were not looking at an illness, but medicine, they could not escape these methods. They had already looked at the pill for a very long time, so the next step was naturally to smell it. The old doctor from Wenshui glanced at the Tang 17th Master. This old doctor had specially taken the pulse of the Tang Old Master. If not for the fact that today's matter was too urgent, not even the Tang 17th Master would have been able to invite him from Wenshui City. The Tang 17th Master was naturally rather polite to him, saying, "Sir Yang, please do as you please." The old doctor from Wenshui, who was addressed as Sir Yang, did not stand on ceremony. He lowered his head, placed it on the red pill, and took in a deep breath. In the next moment, Sir Yang's face turned red and his eyes became hazy. It was like he had drunk wine, like he had entered a room of orchids and orchids, and he seemed to be intoxicated and confused about where he was. The guardian of the pavilion of heavenly secrets slightly creased his brow and coughed. Sir Yang came to his senses and said, "The main ingredient truly is cinnabar, but there's also immortal grass, cinnamon, angelica, goji berries, cloves, rock sugar. To be able to identify so many ingredients with just a sniff, this person's attainments in the medical path were truly extraordinary." As the Tang's 17th Master listened to these ingredients, he creased his brow, thinking, are they going to stew meat? Why is there rock sugar? He had no idea that these rather common ingredients would even be added to stew meat. It was precisely because their medicinal properties were moderate and mild that they were perfect as supplementary ingredients. The vast majority of pills in the world contain them. As for rock sugar, it was like stir-frying rice, having the effect of catalyzing the medicinal energy and also neutralizing the bitterness. The guardian of the pavilion of heavenly secrets and the two famed doctors of Fengyang were both members of the medical path, so they naturally did not find this strange. They also came over and sniffed, then reported the names of a few more ingredients: huayam, cloves, and desert cistanche. Seeing the still, wet ink on the paper, the doctors muttered to themselves for a while, then began to discuss among themselves. Finally, they said to the Tang's 17th Master, "We still have to act." From start to finish, they had first looked and then smelled, but not a single one of them had dared to touch it, because they all knew how precious this pill was. Now that they had to act, they all agreed. The one responsible for speaking was Sir Yang, as he was a member of the Wenshui Tangs, so it was more convenient for him to speak. When the cinnabar pill first appeared, the rules set down by that person were not complete enough. The Great Zhou Army and the Hall of Illustrious Persons had once worked together to secretly keep a few pills, hoping to analyze and deduce the composition of the pill. However, they had wasted 3 whole pills and still had not been able to completely understand the ingredients. The doctors that had appeared in the secret room today were all extraordinary individuals, but how could they rely on just looking and smelling? The Tang's 17th Master had long since mentally prepared himself for this, but he still couldn't help but feel somewhat disappointed, because this meant that the cinnabar pill would very quickly be wasted. "Be careful and don't waste it," he said with a gloomy expression. "These are 2 lives." Chapter 751. This was naturally referring to the cinnabar pill. The people in the room were somewhat confused. The cinnabar pill could cure the dead and regrow bones. No matter how severe the injury, it could cure it, so it was naturally equivalent to 1 life. But why did the Tang's 17th Master say that it was 2 lives? If it was said that it was worth it no matter how many people died for something as important as the cinnabar pill, then it should be said that it was worth many lives. This pill can save a person's life. In order to obtain this pill, my Tang family has also sacrificed a person's life to exchange for it. The Tang's 17th Master thought of the corpse that had already been burned to ash, and his face turned even gloomier. The deceased had been a spy the Tang clan had nurtured in the Great Zhou Army many years in advance. He had a very promising future and was already a well-known deputy general of the Black Mountain Army. If the Tang clan had properly helped him develop, it was impossible to say whether he would have become a divine general in a few decades. But now, he had died for the sake of this pill. It had been 9 whole months since the Tang clan had obtained the authority to distribute the cinnabar pill from the Hall of Illustrious Persons. The Tang clan could no longer suppress their innate greed and attempted to obtain even greater benefits. In order to understand the composition of this pill, they had acted with extreme caution in order to deceive the mysterious supplier. After careful calculations, the Tang clan confirmed that the deputy general had the right to obtain a cinnabar pill and had him heavily injured on the battlefield. As expected, the Black Mountain Army had given one of the cinnabar pills to the deputy general. According to the rules, the deputy general wasted no time. Under the watchful eyes of many people, he took the pill, but he did not survive because his luck was truly terrible. The moment the cinnabar pill entered his throat, he breathed his last. Many people felt that this was a great pity. A few people felt that it was a pity for the deputy general's luck, but the vast majority felt that since the deputy general was already dead, there was no need to waste a cinnabar pill. Everyone knew that the cinnabar pill would dissolve upon contact with water, its medicinal properties dissipating into nothingness. Once it entered the deputy general's stomach, it would be difficult to regenerate. It was precisely because they were certain of this that they did not think too much of it other than sighing and cursing. Only the Wenshui Tangs knew that the deputy general's body had long ago been filled with a thin pouch made of some unknown material. And after that deputy general took the cinnabar pill, whether or not he was willing to sever his own meridians and die, he was doomed to die. This was because two old guardians of the Tang clan had been watching him when he collapsed. The general was buried according to the custom of the old county, but that night the new grave was dug up. Today, his corpse and the cinnabar pill had been delivered to the Mount Song Army headquarters, to the Tang's 17th master's eyes. The Tang's 17th master said nothing more, but everyone in the room could sense his mood, and their expressions turned even graver. The guardian of the pavilion of heavenly secrets picked up a silver spoon and crushed the crimson pill in a porcelain bowl. Then, he slowly ground the pill into powder and divided it into 5 portions. Each of the medical experts took a portion of the powder and took out their own methods and abilities that they would normally never show to others, as well as those strange tools, and began to study it. Researching and distinguishing the ingredients was a process that had to be gone through when imitating a medicine. It was extremely dry and dull, so it seemed especially long. The Tang's 17th master remained in the secret room the entire time, not taking a single step out. After some time had passed, a red ray of light seeped in from the ventilation hole in the west. It was already dusk. This task was finally completed. The people raised their heads, either dripping medicine into their bloodshot eyes or twisting their necks to loosen their aching bodies. But in this seemingly relaxed and calm environment, a tense atmosphere still lingered. No one spoke. The Tang's 17th master's expression grew even gloomier, just like that dark wall that the light of dust from the west could not reach. In the end, he could not allow this situation to continue for too long. The old doctor from Wenshui somewhat tiredly coughed and wrote down the ingredients he had identified on a piece of paper. The other medical experts also noted down the components of the medicinal herbs that they had determined. The Tang's 17th master's brow was still furrowed, but his expression was much more relaxed. This was because he could clearly see that the ingredients they had written down were basically the same in proportion to their ingredients. It truly is a never-before-seen pill recipe. It's extremely extraordinary. It seems simple and crude, but it actually hides a supreme principle. If used to staunch bleeding and cleanse one star, it should be extremely effective. The old doctor from Wenshui shook his head and said, "But it definitely can't do what the rumors say." The Tang's 17th master said nothing, because he knew that there was bound to be a follow-up, or perhaps an explanation. There is one ingredient that this old one analyzed for a long time, but he was still unable to determine what it was. The old doctor from Wenshui, Dr. Yang, glanced at the guardian from the pavilion of heavenly secrets and the 2 doctors from Fengyang County. "I think that everyone else is the same." The 3 medical experts nodded, their expressions somewhat perplexed. Dr. Yang continued, "There is no ingredient in this world that the 4 of us cannot identify, which can only mean that this is perhaps not a medicinal ingredient, at least not before that person refined the cinnabar pill. Now, It seems that the wonders of the cinnabar pill probably rest on this item. The Tang's 17th master stepped forward, took the glass from the guardian from the pavilion of heavenly secrets, and carefully examined a small disc on the table. The small disc was a remnant of the pill that had already been separated, melted with water, and then steamed. If one looked at it with the naked eye, it would appear to be ordinary medicinal dregs. Even in the eyes of the Tang's 17th master, it was just a slightly finer powder. But under the glass, produced by the pavilion of heavenly secrets, this powder was finally revealed in its truest form. The vast desert was littered with square stones, as well as a few red crystalline shards. Compared to the barren desert of dregs, they were extremely few in number. If one were to observe more closely, one would be able to see that these red crystal fragments were formed by countless strands of glass. Visually, they looked extremely tough and indestructible. If one stared at these red crystal fragments for a longer period of time, one could even sense the terrifying light energy contained in them. These red shards are the reason the cinnabar pill was so dark red, and they were also the answer to the question that all the medical experts had racked their brains for. After some time, the Tang's 17th master raised his head and asked the crowd, "Just what is this? Or what could it be?" The priest, who had been silent since entering the room, finally opened his mouth to speak. It looked a little like blood coral. The words blood coral caused the medical experts to reveal shocked expressions, and then a pensive look appeared on their faces. The Tang's 17th master was also very shocked, but after a few moments, he firmly declared, "This is impossible." This cleric had once been a bishop of the Hall of Illustrious Persons. In the purge led by Mao Qiuyu and Linghai Zhuang, he had luckily managed to preserve his life, but he had been expelled from the Li Palace. He was in charge of refining pills in the Hall of Illustrious Persons and had once come into contact with the cinnabar pill. Logically speaking, his judgment was very trustworthy, but he could not convince the Tang's 17th master, because the Tang's 17th master just so happened to know that the only blood coral in the world was in the old estate of the Wenshui Tang clan. Hello, everyone. I've finished asking the editor, and now there's nothing I can do. Then let's do the actuarial calculations. There's no need to worry about the Genesis Chinese network. According to Qidian's current rules, 2,300 words should be charged 6. 9 Qidian coins. Erasing the odd part will charge 6. This way, we can save 0. 9 Qidian coins per chapter. Because the repeated chapters seem to have charged 6 Qidian coins, I will update 7 chapters of 2,300 words in the future. If there's a mistake in the details, we'll talk about it. Alright, now that we've chatted up to this point, there are definitely many friends who will say that I'm not at all carefree. Yes, I can't be carefree. I don't want to be talked about by others for the sake of a few pennies. It's just like these past few days giving me a headache. In addition, the title of the chapter is from an author I like very much. I recommend his book to everyone. Chapter 752. Seeing the composition of the cinnabar pill. Does anyone think of something? Oh, don't think too much. I'm talking about something that's common in life. Only after that novel incident in Wenshui City did the Tang 17th master begin to manage the clan's medicine shop. However, he was extremely knowledgeable, and the blood coral was far too famous. It was not a true coral, but a crystallization of dragon blood. Moreover, it was no ordinary crystallization of dragon blood. Only the true blood of a golden dragon or a black frost dragon could condense into a crystal. To the dragon race, the blood coral was the most important and sacred object. They would not allow anyone to possess it, not even the great Zhou Imperial Palace or the Li Palace. The Wenshui Tangs, because of a story from countless years ago, were fortunate enough to possess a blood coral the size of a forearm. It was also hidden in a secret room in their old estate, never daring to see the light of day. The bishop listened to the Tang's 17th master's assertion and hesitantly said, "If someone secretly infiltrates the southern sea," the Tang's 17th master shook his head. All the dragon race view the blood coral as their own life. Even if Zhou Dufu were to come back to life, he would not be able to obtain it while surrounded by dragons. The bishop was confused. But for such abundant energy and such a thick scent of life, what else could it be other than crystallization of dragon blood? The Tang's 17th master pensively asked, could it be sacred light? This strange object has no divine chi, and its energy is far too berserk. The bishop shook his head. Moreover, sacred light is formless and immaterial, extremely difficult to materialize. Not even the 5 archbishops of the Li Palace could do it, unless they offered up essence blood. Sir Yang agreed. Correct. The ingredients we identified were probably used to neutralize the destructive power of the berserk energy. Crucially, according to the scriptures of the Church, materializing sacred light requires an archbishop to offer up all his essence blood. How could so many cinnabar pills be produced endlessly? The famed doctor of Fengyang asked in shock, doesn't that mean that if you want to use the crystallization of sacred light to save someone, you can only save them once, and that archbishop will also have to die? The bishop solemnly replied, correct. The starry sky has always been fair, and life has never been noble or lowly. The Tang's 17th master was quiet for a very long time, seemingly pondering something. In the end, he did not ask any further questions. You still have 1 day and 1 night. After saying this, he walked out of the secret room and came to the slightly cold courtyard. His gaze passed over the bare branches and landed on the distant and gloomy sky. The shopkeeper and the bishop came behind him and felt his current mood. They vaguely guessed what he was worried about and could not help but remain silent. The Wunshui Tangs had paid such an enormous price to invite these renowned doctors, but their true goal was not to analyze the composition of the medicine, to find a way to replicate the cinnabar pill. The Hall of Illustrious Persons and the Great Zhou Army had already failed, proving that this path was a dead end, or perhaps too difficult to walk. What the Tang clan truly wanted to do was to use these medicinal ingredients to find out where the cinnabar pill had come from. Immortal reeds were produced everywhere, but the medicinal efficacy varied slightly from place to place. Angelica could be found all over the continent, but one could always find traces of it in the circulation of medicinal herbs. There's also clove, aphrodisiac. Everything in the world would inevitably leave behind traces. The Tang clan did business all over the world and possessed unimaginable resources and networks. It was the easiest for them to capture these traces and then find the place where the traces began or ended. If they could find out where the cinnabar pill had come from, they would naturally be able to find that person. In this war between humans and demons, that person was far too important. Even if this war was removed, that person would still be important. Whether it was the Tang clan, the Orthodoxy, or the Imperial Court, they all naturally wanted to control this person. If we trace back the 34 ingredients, we should be able to find the place where the cinnabar pill was made, but even if we find that person, we might not be able to control him. It was obvious that the bishop knew the Tang clan's true goal. With a slightly uneasy tone, he said, at the very beginning, the 2 divine generals of the Hall of Illustrious Persons in Blue Pass made similar attempts. Although they were not as close to that person as we were, they should have found some clues and even made the entire plan. The shopkeeper glanced at him and asked, if we can't control him, we'll just kill him? The bishop nodded. This sounded like a very unreasonable matter, but in this sinister human world, it was a matter of course. Such a mystical pill, such an important person. Either they would be used or they would die, so they could not fall into the hands of others, especially enemies. Because the military was taking this war into consideration, its attitude was relatively conservative and it did not participate too deeply. However, the Hall of Illustrious Persons was very worried that that person would be controlled by the Imperial Court, and they also knew that that person would not be willing to be found and would assuredly be enraged, so they made arrangements to kill that person. And then, a hint of fear appeared on the bishop's face as he said in a trembling voice, 33 bishops of the Xuanyang Church died in a single night, their deaths extremely wretched. The shopkeeper's expression abruptly changed. What a tough response, what a powerful move. It was obvious that the Xuanyang Church, which had lost 33 bishops in a single night, had been specifically responsible for carrying out this task. The bishop turned to the Tang's 17th master and said, Mao Qiuyu and Ling Haizhuang's purge of the capital might have been an attempt to conceal this matter. These words had an unspoken meaning. The Tang's 17th master was silent, but he was thinking about something else. In truth, he had always had a guess as to who the master of the cinnabar pill was. Just like some people, he had also wondered if it might be the one who had disappeared. If those red crystals brimming with violent energy really were the legendary blood coral, then the answer was even more certain. He was the Tang third master's blood brother, his most trusted subordinate, so he knew even more secrets. The one who had disappeared currently had a dragon at his side, and it just so happened to be a black frost dragon. But it was only today that he learned that 33 bishops of the Xuanyang Church had died in a single night. This made him somewhat doubtful of this judgment. That person might have had such powerful methods and the right to make such a tough response, but that person had never been so callous and emotionless, not to mention that those bishops had always been his subordinates. That person was unquestionably an important figure, but he had never had the self-awareness of an important figure. Moreover, based on the Tang clan's analysis, if that person was still alive, he was probably in the south. Last year, a bitter battle had taken place on the snowy plains. The black-armored heavy cavalry of the Great Zhou dynasty and the wolf cavalry of the demon race had fought endlessly on the vast and boundless plains. No one had expected that that person who had vanished from the continent for so long would appear on the battlefield with a torrential rain of swords. After a bloody battle, he reversed the situation, but he was heavily injured by the terrifyingly powerful demon, General Haidi. Thus, he once more vanished from the battlefield, never to be seen again. Only a few important figures like the Tang 17th master knew that after that person was heavily injured by Haidi, he had been ambushed by 3 human experts. This matter was naturally very shameless and could not be known by anyone, so the imperial court had kept it extremely secret. Thus, the Tang clan concluded that if that person had really managed to survive, he was naturally in the south. It was most likely Holy Maiden Peak, but it could also be Scholatry Manor or even Mountley because only these places could protect his life. If that person was in the south, then the cinnabar pill that had already appeared in the armies on the front lines for a year naturally had nothing to do with him. So why were there so many clues pointing at him? Could it be that the master of the cinnabar pill, hiding behind the curtains, wanted to use that person's name to do something big? Chapter 753. The path of merchants forever pursued realism. Only those who fell into the bag would be happy, and any fog, once torn apart, would have no value. The Tang's 17th master no longer thought about this matter, deciding to first find that person. His gaze moved from the shopkeeper to the bishop, and he said, "The third master's orders were extremely clear this time. This person must be found and then controlled. If not, I will die, all of you will die, and you will die an extremely wretched death." This bishop was a foreshadowing the Tang clan had planted in the orthodoxy. Now that he had been expelled from the capital, although he had luckily survived, he could no longer be of any greater use. If he could not display his loyalty, ability, or usefulness in the matter of the cinnabar pill, then the fate that awaited him would undoubtedly be very unpleasant. The bishop paled upon hearing this, while the shopkeeper broke out in a cold sweat. The two of them were well aware that this matter was now involved in the struggle for power within the Wenshui clan. Their status was not enough for them to know all the inside information, but they were well aware of how many storms had occurred in Wenshui City in the last 2 years. The struggle between the branches was growing more and more intense, even bitter. Although no one had died yet, there was already the faint scent of blood. The most important sign was the relapse of the chief branch's old illness, and at the beginning of this year, the increasingly famous Tang third master had given birth to a son. The Wenshui Tangs were a clan that had existed for 1,000 generations, so they had their own rules. At the beginning, the old master had decided to have the chief branch inherit the family business, so Tang 36 was the only son and grandson of the Tang clan. Before he formally inherited the family business, the old master forbade the other branches from having children of the third generation. This rule was extremely cruel, but fortunately, The masters of the various branches had all succeeded in their cultivation and could live for several hundred years, so there was no rush. This rule was finally broken at the beginning of the year. The Tang third master had given birth to a son. This was the only bloodline of the Tang clan's third generation besides Tang 36. What did this mean? Had the old master finally completely changed his mind about the succession of the clan? Had the chief branch fallen out of favor? Or was it that the Tang third master no longer had the patience to wait and had clearly and valiantly expressed his ambition to seize power? Of course, ambition had to be built on strength. Right now, with third master as the leader of the Tang family's branches, they had already gained a clear advantage in this battle. In the massive upheaval in the capital 2 years ago, and in the behind-the-scenes dealings even earlier, the Tang third master represented Shang Xingzhou in moving back and forth between the various factions of the continent, communicating with them. He played an extremely important role in overthrowing Tianhai's rule, and in the crucial battle to destroy the capital's imperial design, he played an irreplaceable role. In this major event, the Tang third master's performance was perfect in every aspect, and he was also very low-key. While bringing the Wenshui clan unimaginable benefits, he also greatly conformed to the Tang clan's demeanor, obtaining the support and even worship of many clansmen. If it wasn't for the fact that winter of that year had failed to kill Wang Pe, perhaps he would have already replaced Tang 36's father. At this moment, when the shopkeeper and the bishop heard that this was the Tang third master's order, they instantly lost all thoughts of begging for mercy. Then they had to hurry and find that person. If they couldn't control him, they could just kill him. Perhaps it was because the Tang third master was too famous for his coldness, or perhaps it was because Master 17 had been sitting in the courtyard the entire time, personally watching over them. But the analysis and deciphering of the pill proceeded much faster than expected. By the evening of the same day, the medical experts and the shopkeepers in charge of transportation and local products of the Tang clan finally came to a preliminary conclusion. Where a certain herb was produced, where it was transported, where it passed, where it could only be found, and how much of a certain herb was consumed in a year in Tianliang County. Countless pieces of information were gathered together, and then, accompanied by the clattering of the abacus, were transformed into numbers on a piece of paper, ultimately pointing to an extremely unremarkable place on the map. That place was the northeastern part of Tianliang County, a place rarely visited by humans. The weather was cold and the ground was frozen. Amidst the mountains was a small town called Gaoyang, which was almost completely abandoned. In the sacred hospital, separated by a wall from the inn, as the injuries of the injured gradually improved, the mood became more and more relaxed. In the deepest room, the mood was still oppressive and gloomy. The young array master still had not awoken. His slightly tanned face was now very pale, and his breathing was short and weak. Anhua sat by the window, her eyes closed in rest. She was very exhausted. According to the orders of the Mount Song Army headquarters, she, the clergy of the sacred hospital, and the military doctor were doing their utmost to treat the young array master. It was now certain that the young array master could last for another 7 days, 2 more days than the clergy had originally predicted. This was naturally because of her arrival. The sacred light technique of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green was not one bit weaker than the divine technique of the Li Palace, or else Holy Maiden Su Yorong would not have chosen this place to study. But this was still not enough, because the cinnabar pill would only appear in 10 days. The young array master was first on the list of medicines to be received by the Mount Song Army headquarters. As long as there was medicine, he could obtain it and survive. But Anhua knew that no matter how hard she, the clergy, and the military doctor tried, they could not make him last until then. Hope was right before her eyes, and it seemed to be getting closer and closer, but if one carefully looked at it, it was still so far away. In the end, there would always be times when one's strength was limited. This fact could easily make one feel sorrow, even despair. Ending her meditation, Ahua opened her eyes and walked to the edge of the cavern to observe the young array master's current condition. Perhaps it was because he had not rested for a day and night and was constantly being cared for. but she felt that the young array master's appearance was getting clearer and clearer. How could she help him survive? Was there any other hope? Like asking the Archbishop of the Lee Palace to act? No. Even if those important figures were willing to act for the young array master, they would not be able to get here in time, much less the current Lee Palace. Other than dispatching a considerable number of clergy and doctors to the northern front lines, the Lee Palace was abnormally inconspicuous. From morning to dusk, from spring to autumn, and then to winter, the doors of the hall were tightly shut and heavily guarded. A prefect of the orthodoxy like Mao Qiuyu would not easily take a single step out of the Lee Palace. This situation had already persisted for 2 years, because it had already been 2 years since the Pope had left the capital. No one knew where the young Pope was, or even if he was still alive. And Hua paid no attention to what was happening outside her window, nor did she know of the current state of the imperial court or Xiulao City. She only knew that the war had been going on for the last 2 years, and that many people had already died. The sects and noble clans of the South had played an extremely important role in this war. From the Tianhai Divine Empress to the venerable Taoist Master Shang Xingzhou, they had all placed great importance on the confluence of the North and South. The new generation of cultivators had also begun to formally step onto the stage of history. The youths of the Mount Lee Sword Sect, Scholarly Manor, and the Six Ivies had displayed the most outstanding performances. Of course, compared to the disturbance caused by that person on the battlefield for the first time, these were all playing house and not even worth mentioning. Although they were all youths, they were still different. That was the first time he appeared before the people of the world after leaving the capital, and also the last time. It was a clear and crisp autumn day. 10,000 horses galloped, and the smoke of war rose from all directions. His 1,000 swords struck out simultaneously. Countless demon soldiers sprayed their blood and died. The plains transformed into a sea of blood. In this sea of solemn and chaotic chi, demon General Hai Di struck with all his strength, tearing apart the clouds and splitting the earth, causing the heavens and earth to change color. The young pope collapsed with heavy injuries and then vanished once more. It was as if he had come to the battlefield, appeared in front of so many people, took such a great risk, killed so many demons, shed so much blood, and suffered such heavy injuries, just to tell the world and some people that he was still alive. This was truly like a child playing house.